different feel on Saturday morning of a roundtable. First of all, we don't have as many observers. That's understood. We get a little bit slower start because it's just we're operating at a slightly slower speed, and we have lost some people. Liam, as you know, had to go back to New York. But we're here, and we want to thank everybody for being here. So, sure, going to do a few things this morning that are intended to help us get best value out of our last day together. I made a commitment yesterday to allow observers to encourage us to think about things that we have perhaps not sufficient attention to. I'll do that in a second. We always like to start the day with reflections from the day before. Reflections in the sense of two questions. What's important that you want to underscore that we should focus on today that we took yesterday or even the day before? And relatedly, what have we not covered? So I want to do that as well. But I want to also start with a version of where we started, which is that we asked each other, or made commitments to each other, things that we wanted to see, our hopes for our time together. And that was the first assignment for me to you, was to just take a moment to express your reasons for being here, your hopes for our time together, what you thought would be of value to you by being here at the roundtable. So here's what we want to do this morning. I'm going to ask observers just to throw in some ideas we may not have covered. And then I'll give you a version of that same assignment, which is to ask you, what do you want to make sure we talk about before we leave? If there's something that you think that we're missing, let's make sure that we get that. So we'll have some time to think about that. But we have some of our trusty observers here who might want to say something. And if you do, stand up and introduce yourself. Yes, that's you.
I'm Dennis Nordmo. I have a background in public health, community development, ministry, family life in Detroit. And there were 4 issues that I identified about 30 this morning. I was trying to sleep.
When this morning?
About 2:33.
I was up too. We couldn't talk this through.
Let me just get up and write it down. So anyway, I'm going to try to sum this up very concisely. One, there is a challenge that I haven't heard spoken to very clearly about the tension between massive long-term multi-trillion-dollar investment that we all want to solve some basic underlying social problems. That's one thing. The other thing is we want homicides to come down now. And can a focused investment be put together on that separate from the other? And can we have these 2 issues on their own separate timelines? Secondly, isn't the reduction of lethal violence in our urban communities itself a justice issue? If we could do that, wouldn't that be an overwhelming contribution to social justice? Whether or not we're simultaneously solving every other problem known to man. Thirdly, some of the strategies that have been shown to be effective, reducing lethal violence, have involved very intensive work by especially targeted groups of police and interventionists. That kind of work requires a sort of an enhanced degree of intrusiveness of the police in the very communities where these problems are concentrated, the very communities which have great sensitivity about the role of police in those communities. Can a social compact be worked out so that this can happen and can go forward? Fourthly, the social, political decisions that have to be made, the kind of consensus that we have to develop at that broad societal, political level, requires a language beyond the touchy-feely thing, the mutual respect thing, the politically correct, highly sensitive language that we've been talking about here. It's the language of public health, for example. We need to talk in documenting this problem about years of potential life loss. That's something we can calculate. In Michigan, I looked up the calculations. We get 2,000 years of potential life loss for minority males in the state per 100,000 population per year, compared to 93 for white males. Okay, that's one way of telling the story that other people can understand. We need to talk, be comfortable with economic language. Yes, human life is a human life, but there are methods for that various people come up with for saying this is the social cost in dollars to society for a homicide. Those estimates range from 7 million to 17 million. You multiply that times the number of homicides, you see the net cost that we're already experiencing for these problems, let alone the, talking about the corrections budget and so on. And in Michigan numbers, that's $3.5 billion a year cost to society using the minimum estimate. And the budgetary language is the return on investment. If we spent X millions of dollars, what would be the return? So those issues belong in the discussion.
Thanks, Dennis. You did good work at 2:30 in the morning. Very, very constructive. Any other observer comments? Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Patterson, a little stuffy. Two quick notes, observations. One was, ironically, the gender violence conversation was the one that was most shortened in the context of the other conversations that we had. Conversations that happened post that conversation went over. So from the observer standpoint, we had time. And so it's just interesting that in the context of making that the seed and the foundation, we still kind of bulldozed over it. The second observation is that it doesn't seem like we talked enough about resources, and if we have, we talk about the same types of resources we always talk about, which are in some ways still state run, state controlled. 501c3 dollars are state controlled dollars. So when can we have a conversation, particularly within the philanthropic space, of what does it look like to be more innovative about the type of money that is raised? And what does that investment look like, and how deep do philanthropies need to go to pull through that investment? What does it mean, and how important is it to really solve the issue? Because it might mean different types of businesses, not social entrepreneurship, because that's still state dollars. Different type of money, some very interesting risks, and not any type of government or 501c3 for anything that has a tax code associated. So it would be just interesting to talk about are philanthropic institutions bold enough to even take a look at their charters and say, what more can we do to actually apply some real resources, some flexible, risky resources, much of what the community actually wants to be able to address these issues.
And from behind me and to the side of the room, any comments? Questions? Seeing none. So here's the assignment to everybody at the table. It's a two-part assignment, and everybody gets to play in this game. So this is not going to ask just for people to step out. First is, what have you taken away from the past 2 days that you want to underscore, that you think is important? And many of you have come up to me and Bruce and others and said this to us, but it's important to share it with. What have you? The one thing that you learned that's different, or that was elevated in importance, that you want to continue to underscore? That's the first question, and just a sentence. And the second is, it's separate, it's a different question. What do you want to make sure we talk about today before we break? Have we missed something? Or haven't given it enough attention? That'll maybe set an agenda for some of our discussions so that we want to leave today feeling like the first 2 days were great because we learned something, and that's the first question. And today, we want to make sure that we don't leave without having talked about something important. So just take a minute with those two questions, and then we'll start with, let's see, just so you know. Okay, first up. First question is, the last 2 days, what have you heard, learned, taken away from the discussion that you think is important? It could be something new, it could be something that's been reinforced for you. Could be something that you think we didn't pay enough attention to, but you want to elevate it. And the second question is, if you were to leave here today, at the end of the day, you don't want to feel like we didn't pay attention to something, right? So that this is the want to create some urgency around some topics. As soon as I see Ron Davis stop scribbling, we'll get started. So when I call on you, please answer both questions. A reflection of the past today is something important, and a hope for the day is to things that you want to see come.
So good morning, everyone. And let me start by saying thank you for allowing me to participate in some great discussions that we're working through. And I would say what I got out of the last 2 days would be that when we talk about reimagining justice, I think one of the things that I didn't think of greatly is that I think the first step to that is that we have to basically first reimagine ourselves and step away from our own successes and failures. That we're still very much driven by our own experiences until we can step away from that. And I'm finding myself struggling with a lot of concepts through my experiences telling me otherwise, but we need to push away from that to reimagine. So I think what I got out of the 2 days is people pushing the envelope, pushing new ways of thinking that do make us uncomfortable. But I think the fact that I am uncomfortable is probably a good thing, a very good thing. One area I think I would like for us to focus on, and this is just probably a technicality, is to make sure that we have a glossary of terms in which we're using, that we agree with the terms mean. The interchange between violence and force, and some other words and concepts. You just need to make sure that we're all meaning the same thing. It's not a question if they're right or wrong, is that at least if we're talking about it, we should know. And I think other people brought that up. I think I would like to leave us, and most importantly, those that are watching, making sure they understand exactly who we are and not to be misinterpreted.
One thing that I've learned a lot in the last couple of days, but one thing that I learned that I really thought about is the power of sort of neurobiology and of our actual physical brains to get in the way of some of the things that we've been wanting to do, but also as a potential opportunity for grappling with violence in the way that people respond to violence, heal from violence. I feel like there's a lot more that I want to think about and learn about as a potential part of our path forward. And one thing that I would love for us to talk a little bit more about is, we started to think some, and we've heard about some examples in Detroit and New York and otherwise, where there is a real change going on, and communities are finding and taking and in some cases being supported in having a new role in creating safety and in creating health. And what I want to talk a little more about, if we can, is how is that something that becomes a sustained shift in power and not a short-term swing pendulum that will swing back.
Joe?
Yeah, actually, I had some thoughts on this I was thinking about this morning that are similar to this and kind of touch on what Ron said and also what some of our observers said as well. I think Peter mentioned it specifically yesterday, but particularly when we started the conversation yesterday, and David said we're disadvantaged communities. I will readily admit that it took a good 20, 25 minutes until I think Daniel finally said, I'll say oppressed, that's the word. I didn't know, right? And I think Peter, made it clear yesterday, I want to underscore that there are a lot of allies that are trying to understand this stuff, because as far as I remember, that was okay like 10 minutes ago, right? But I thought that was all right. I really didn't understand what was going on. So I appreciate that Peter mentioned that, and I was just trying to collect my thoughts on it yesterday to figure out how to say it best. And at the same time, I want to underscore that that's what our first observer said as well, is that the language I think we're using here, obviously somebody coming from the right side of the aisle, I don't hear a lot of this, right? Everyone's trying to get better at it, but I don't hear it a lot. And I think when I go out, sort of especially when I'm on the Hill or talking to people who are on the right side of the aisle, if I explain things the way we explain them in here, they will literally not understand what I'm saying, right? It goes a lot further if I can say certain words, like if I can just say, yes, if we change this, then murderers will get out of prison, right? If I can say, no, this will help defendants. That's a big difference. And it's also very empowering. I think that's something I want to underscore to kind of transition to the second half. Thing I want to do today is talk about some of the other allies that are out there, but because maybe we are literally not speaking the same language, we're not going to be able to work together with them. And I think that's a problem, right? Because for me, I'm going to get into the technical legal aspects of it with due process. To call someone a defendant is actually very helpful, because the earlier I can call someone a defendant, the earlier they can get more rights attached to what they go through in the prison system, right? And through from when they're first picked up. If they're a defendant, that's very helpful. Along with that, I also want to point out sort of what going back to what you mentioned earlier, sort of what our hopes were for the event as we came in. Mine was to try to focus on sort of non-traditional, private or non-governmental solutions. I really thought I was going to have to really push on that. But that came up very naturally. And I think it's something we need to really focus on, because again, a lot of talk about shrinking the government, talk about not liking unions. Some people even talking about maybe taking up arms. Obviously, that's a very split difference here, right? But hey, you start to sound a lot like a lot of Republicans I know, right? So let's think about ways we can work with sort of non-traditional allies, I guess, in this space and try to speak that same language to them as well.
Thanks. Beth?
So I think for me, one of the learnings has come from the process. I mentioned this to Jeremy and then also to Bruce, that I think this is one of the first meetings that I've been in a long time where academics and non-academics had equal place at the table. In fact, I feel like the leadership of the expertise of people who don't work inside universities has been very moving to me, and it's I think shaped the conversation in a very, very profoundly important way. I appreciate whatever happened, and I assume that was intentional to make that possible. And so I'm leaving both with some ideas about how to have more meaningful collaborations, more kind of real talk. I'm leaving very moved by what's happening in Detroit and the leadership of activists here, and kind of thinking about openness to different kind of linkages. I think in terms of what we've missed, and I don't know that it's possible to do today, I want to echo that I think there's something still a little imprecise about our definition of violence. And I think it's not nuanced enough, it's not broad enough, it's, and that of course is linked to the questions that I think I was trying to raise in my paper, but even beyond that, I think the imprecision is both a practical problem, but I also think it's a political problem. And when we talk about reimagining justice, which I know we want to do, I think we have to have some political clarity about what violence means in that. And the second part of that, I think, is linked to something that has also been imprecise for me, which is the relationship between short-term and long-term strategies. The vision of what we want as a long-term strategy, I think we sometimes walk up to, but then we slip back to short-term strategies that will help us kind of recover or deal with whatever we have to in the next day or so. So I want something about that.
David.
So I'll echo what Beth said about the quality of the space and the process. What Beth said. So thank you. As far as what I've taken away, I think I've gained a new appreciation for the need to do more reimagining of the relationship between state and community. And we have models for that. They're just models. I think there's much more reimagining to do. And folks in this room have some great ideas. And as far as what I would like to discuss today, I'm not sure if it needs to be discussed today, but I want to see more discussion around it, more thinking around it. Is this question of what institution, at what level, right? Is there responsibility for responding to community trauma, and what does accountability look like, right? In that responsibility.
Thank you. So I've learned a lot, and just from an asset lens, I think what's been reinforced is that we know a lot, actually. There's a lot of knowledge, and we heard a lot about what does work. Not necessarily within the systems that we're accustomed to working in, I think, and that's what's been revealing. But I think it would be a productive way to move forward. Nina and I were talking about this yesterday, that to really do an exercise where we're thinking about, okay, what do we agree upon? What do we know works, and where can we agree, and start from there. And it's okay that we disagree on a lot of things, because that's how we can actually move forward. What I would like to talk more about, and again, don't know if it's today or a continuing conversation, because I think this is the beginning. I think this is scratching the surface, and this conversation with these kinds of people at the table needs to continue. And I do believe the criminal justice field is ready for it, but we have to keep it going. Is that tension between the immediate need to reduce violence and the long-term process of reforming our systems. And I would love to talk more about the alliances that are necessary to do that. Ron mentioned yesterday, I believe, and what that looks like, and what it means to bring different allies to the table, and the role of law enforcement, and how we can get to a place where we are aligned to reduce violence.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me. But I would say this is very informative for me. I've learned a lot from intergenerational transmission violence. I heard gender-specific violence that normally don't come without work. So getting that information is something that we'll definitely start thinking about in terms of our work. What I want to see is more solutions, solution-oriented type of discussions where we talk about what work, what we're doing. And as I said yesterday, marrying that with academia. One of the other things I would like to see is for true and real respect in marriage of what Beth said. People, universities with people on the streets. It has to be a true respect, even in the way that we interact with each other, because a lot of times body language, stuff, all that stuff matters. You can't say I love you, that I'm for you, but your actions show different. So you really have radical empathy for people who push the envelope. I thought it was very impressive to see that brother Ray bring all those soldiers from the streets here on numerous occasions, a different group that says to me that that brother has the key to the streets, that he's doing the work. So that kind of work has to be uplifted and really integrated, not just as observers, but integrated into this. We can't, and there's no ambition, but we have to interact with the people that we study. We got to really interact with the people that we study. We have to really interact with the people that's on the ground that's doing the work. Because they are the closest to the issue. So seeing that is very important. And I think we'll get there. But also the collaboration, having the types of collaboration that speaks to that, real collaboration, where we respect one another, where we really trying to learn from one another, where we really practicing radical empathy for one another. So that's what I like to see. But I think overall it's been great. It's been a real great experience for me. I got a lot of information that I'm gonna take back. I'm normally not this quiet, but I intentionally came to just listen, and I appreciate the work that each and every last one of you are doing, because it's very meaningful, very important work, and I hope that we can connect, we intentionally connect with each other. I love to bring some of y'all to the real deep. That's Dallas. Real deep. I love to see some of you guys in the Cowboys jersey, so y'all can cheer for America's team.
No,
Listen to your audience. You just I was with you too.
Got Cowboys, racing for everybody.
So what happens in moments like this? So we just started a process. It started with Ron going around like this. So what happens to the other side of the room says, okay, I gotta lay back now. I can sort of think about sports. So I like to mix it up. If you've been in the roundtable before, I give everybody the opportunity to call the next person. That's kind of fun. I can do that person. You get to call the next person after you, but we're going to start with Jamal. We're just going to start going around here, right? Not that I'm not saying anything about you, like you were sort of dozing off. But we're just going to make sure everybody's on their toes. And then we'll go down to Kelly. Then we'll figure out where we go next.
I feel like as an activist, I feel very empowered. Listening, first of all, reading the white papers and listening to the academics, they were very effective communicators. And now I feel like I can make that information palatable to people that I work with. I'm excited about that challenge. I'm very inspired. I'm very inspired. It's been great. One of the things I would like for us to do would be if there was like a Facebook group created, we can all join and stay connected. It'd be easy that way. That way, if somebody writes a book or has a presentation, we could all see it real time.
Fatima. 2 questions,
I was
what
one of
you take
those
it away and
people
what you want for today.
Hanging back, I was drinking my tea, enjoying. First, I just want to acknowledge, as you've seen me in that room, there's been some crisis passed away, so I apologize for that. Just trying to get present in the space. As has already been said, I found this space to be really profound, and the attention to trauma-informed practices, the healing space, the inclusion of community, other voices, the accessibility, all of those things are part of the engineering of the new. We have to actually enact processes that train us to be collaborative. They are not embedded, right? Structural racism means that we are always separate. We don't have shared language because we've not had the ability to be together to actually wrestle with language together. And these are the spaces to do that, as messy as they are. So I appreciate that process. We can continue to not only does Square One have the license on this, we can do this in the spaces, which was a call to action, I think, for that. I have been thinking a bunch about this question about academia and what the wisdom is on the streets and how you actually ensure that there's accountability and the way that people who research this work do it. What is, their community participatory value, research, what standards make sense here, and the burden of bringing rigor to research itself. There is a methodology, there is an understanding of what sorts of research is going to actually help mobilize people. I don't think research is the end all be all, but I think it's a critical piece. And so I give a tremendous gratitude to those who are toiling and really thinking about this and articulating, I think, to advocates, activists, folks on the ground, what they need. We are, I think, burdened by the fact that we have not had a significant investment in research on violence, right? We've talked about that. And so I'm wrestling with that. How do we build new structures for accountability in the ways that we build this collaboration so that it's honest, and still rigorous and ensures that we're moving, this is a movement, so how do we continue to move? How do we articulate what's next?
Good morning. Jeremy, you said when you pass it to tomorrow, make sure everybody's on their toes. Can I please get y'all to engage with me for a minute? Can I ask everybody to stand up? And this is super intentional, I promise. Turn to the person next to you and look them dead smack in their face. And while you're looking at them, I want you to look them dead in their eyes. Look them dead in their eyes. And I want you to recognize and notice everything you don't like about them, everything that's ugly about them. Please have a seat. You were still chuckling, laughing, because to be honest about that thing, it was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. Don't nobody want somebody looking them dead in their face trying to figure out anything they don't like about them. So when we talking about being intentional about language, at risk, oppressed, community ain't oppressed. Don't nobody want to be labeled at risk, right? Sitting here in my reflection over the last couple of days, it forced me to think about what Amanda said 5 generations from now. I brought my wife with me today. Because when I think about the 5 generations from now, I got a grandson that just turned 9 months this morning. And I think about his children and his grandchildren and everything else. I think about when I was labeled at risk. Grew up in this community over here. We used to call this the cash corridors. I come out the Jeffrey Projects. They bulldozed our projects and told us to figure it out for the most part, right? But today we can sit here and we can celebrate, and we can talk, we can laugh. So in my reflection, a couple things that I reflected on. I got to be clear, and I hate that my brother Paul Butler is not here today, because I do not agree with the language of oppressed people when we're talking about the neighborhoods. I intentionally brought neighborhood folk here. I intentionally brought the neighborhood folk here. Why? Because they need to be able to see what's possible. Because I provide a level of hope. And I'm being completely honest, this ain't nothing new to me, these tables. I'm sorry, they're not. But they're new to them young men. And they need to see that I get in the rooms and still represent them. And I'm not gonna apologize about it. One of the things that I did not say about D-Live, yeah, we got the BMC, but Wayne State is also our research partner. So we understand the value of research, but we made, myself and my partner Calvin, made an intentional decision to walk away from the university because they wouldn't allow us, and we understood it, they would not allow us to service those young people y'all seen yesterday, none of them, not in a real way. Am I lying, Cal? And they told us, you got a decision to make. And they fired both of us together at the same damn time. And I told my wife, shit, I ain't got no job, but we gonna be all right. The next day we got blessed
because somebody else believed in us, in our mission. So for 2.5 years, we laid low and we just built what we built. I can't make this up to you. The university came back and said, what the fuck did we do? Let's get them back by any means necessary, right? So it's possible, but I gotta state this because we in the D and T, at time. Well, I'm gonna come to the D so I can show you that we can put the D in Dallas, baby. But with that being said, and talking to the community, here's what I know. What y'all saw yesterday with the city of Detroit and the community, you ain't gonna see nowhere else. Not no past the barriers. It ain't gonna happen. I know that for a fact. I done been searching for it. I'm always looking for what people is not doing, not what they're doing. You're not gonna see Mama Barb at the tables, right? Dealing with formerly incarcerated, saying, hey, listen, I need you to go through this process with me, right? And I'm not saying it's not possible. If it's possible in Detroit, it's possible anywhere, but I understand that we're the largest African-American city in Detroit, in the country. So with that being said, let me just do a quick rundown real quick. Real quick. I addressed them. I'm making a commitment after talking to the community, Pastor Barry, the mothers, and the young people. Detroit will take the lead, right, with Amanda's leadership to pilot the first reconciliation justice community, right? Amanda, we appreciate your leadership. You got us, whatever it is that you need. I heard Paul mention this, and like I said, they didn't know my heart. When we talk about police and community relationships, man, this thing gotta change. That ceasefire piece, man, that didn't work, not in the city of Detroit. I believe David model is good for other cities, but in the city of Detroit, it don't work. We've seen more people get indicted and more harm being done to legitimize law enforcement that wasn't ready. When we talk about evidence-based best practices, sometimes we gotta understand, when we building out these models, we need to keep our evidence right there in our own community until we perfect it, and then invite others to come and see our work, versus us trying to take it and scale it across the country because we're chasing research. We got 5 IRBs running right now, 5 of them. But every person that's contributing to that, either co-author, they incentivize. The judges. Ms. Fox, I appreciate what you do. We need more of you. Like seriously, right? But Keith, you triggered it all, bro. And you talked about the choices. A lot of them young people didn't even know that they had a damn decision, man. I told you I ain't know I had a decision. And lastly, my man E, what you doing phenomenal. Detroit ain't ready for that right now, but we aspire to get there, bro. You know what I'm saying? We aspire to get there, and I come in love, I come in peace, and I come in harmony. But if we're gonna do this thing, let's do it the right way. That's it.
Thanks, Ray. Celia, things you took out of first 2 days, and your hope for the day.
I appreciate this space. I appreciate everybody's thoughts, and they're just how we've gotten together. Like, this is the first time that I've actually been in a space where I'm with the academics. It's usually me entertaining a whole room of people and getting re-triggered and re-traumatized most of the time, right? And to truly move our community forward, it's really gonna take the people that understand, and which are the academics, to really understand the expertise that we have and we hold because of the true experiences that you guys read about, what we go through, and really value that space, because at a lot of times our expertise is not valued. And so I appreciate that here, we're all, I feel, at an equal space. You might have a PhD through a university. I have one too, but it comes from the streets. And what I would like to see, because I've been doing this since I've been home for 18 years, and in this space for 17 years, because this is not work, this is my life. And I know that in every space that I go to spaces that I'm very uncomfortable in, and I share things that I'm very uncomfortable about, things that are hidden in the dark, because until we really talk about them things and make everybody uncomfortable, true transformation doesn't happen. And I would like to know, like Jamal said, I go to a lot of these spaces and I meet amazing, brilliant people. But then, you know, we just maybe see each other again in another year or 2 or 3, but we never truly mobilize our strength and our resources and our thoughts and our ideas. It just stays here in this space and dies here. And I'm tired of that. You know, I want to see what is the long-term plan? What is that action plan? And how are we going to move it, that agenda, through community and through, you know, all our social leaders and academic leaders and the people that, the 1%, when do we get to shape them and move them out of that 1%? And really create a space where environmental harm, structural harm, and social control doesn't exist anymore, right? Because one thing that we haven't spoken about, and I think that needs to be talked about, is that generational harm that's caused by all of that I just mentioned. And right now, we're not talking about the alarming rate of suicides in children of color and where their mental health status is. You know, it's killing our future leaders. It's killing our communities. And when do they get to come up and be in this space and talk about how they feel about social control and the environmental harms that exist in their community? Because I'm from the south side of Chicago, which, if anybody has really looked at that history, I belong to what's called the Black Belt that was put there intentionally. So that's my thoughts.
Daniel?
I guess maybe the most important takeaway that I have is that there's a fairly deep distrust of academics. What's the same? And yeah, I wrote down some other things, you know, that are other takeaways for me. But if I sort of rank them right there at the top, is this deep trust of academics, and the takeaway is we got to fix that. It's a long conversation here, but that's maybe the most important takeaway. I guess related to that, as far as what I hope we will potentially talk about before we leave, is I don't know what I think is the best way to express that, but there are different ways of knowing. You know, I come from an environment of, there are standards of how you determine what's true and what's not true. Right? It was pretty powerful to me over these last few days. The power of art and imagination, a different way of knowing, a different depth of knowing. And but then there's the experience that you know, Grace and City or somebody else has talked about. So there are times when my way of knowing and my standards of knowing collide with other ways of knowing. And maybe again, that's another conference or two to sort of how do you sort that out. Because I've been doing this stuff for a while, and I've worked very closely with people doing programs that their heart and soul, they're giving their best, and they know is having an impact, and then my way of knowing doesn't always align with that. So what do you do with that? It's uncomfortable, but I feel like we can't run away from that. All groups need to wrestle with that and come to terms. And I've used the same methodology to evaluate, for example, Safe Streets, a pure violence program in Baltimore. First iteration showed some good positive effects. I did exactly the same thing over a longer period of time. Showed not so, you know, sort of disappointing effects. Deep distrust from the people doing the program, like, what kind of agenda you got, you know, and whatever. It's like, wait a minute, I did exactly the same thing and you loved me. Now I have to get all these funding with one approach of, you know, my way of knowing.
And then I'm doing the same thing and it doesn't look so good, so it must be wrong and I can't trust you anymore. So, you know, these are hard things to wrestle with. And what is the meaning of the different ways of knowing? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Daniel. Kelly?
This is a lot, y'all. These past 3 days have been a lot for me, and I've been trying to take everything in. One, I just want to say thank you for the intentionality behind this entire effort to put something like this together. It takes a lot of carefulness and thought to think about even these, which I just figured out what they were yesterday. I'm like, that's genius. But between Hope's Choice and between all the other ways in which we've been just very intentional and careful about how we express ourselves, I think it's just really meaningful for me because I've been in places where none of that intentionality is there. None of that care is there. So for that, I'm grateful. I think I'm also grateful because 9 times out of 10, I'm only speaking to academics or college students. And I don't get large opportunities to interact with other people that are doing drastically different things, but yet we're all working toward a same or similar goal. And that for me is really encouraging because it makes me feel like I'm not trying to swallow the ocean alone, and that there are other people that are doing this work and in different ways and in valuable ways. So that's really encouraging to me, and I've seen that just with everyone that I've gotten a chance to interact with. I took a lot actually yesterday from Paul Butler and Ray, and one of the things I thought was that, you know, it's not this split of this or that. It really is both. It has to be both. And I think listening to Paul, one of the things that I took away was sort of like, okay, so the community, I see how the community is there and necessary in order to survive. You cannot survive without the community. But one of the things that Paul was saying is that, but if we want to thrive, if we want access, if we want equity, if we want, you know, systemic structural change, you do need the state for that. You do need policy changes. And I see how both of these work hand in hand. I think going forward, you know, okay, I'm a historian, like the past is my roadmap. So I always look to the past to give me sort of direction going forward. And, you know, when I look at the abolitionist movement, one of the things that encourages me is that they were a completely diverse group. They were Black, they were white, they were rich, they were poor. Some were born free, some were fugitives. There was no typical abolitionist. There was no prototype for what it meant to be an abolitionist. Anyone could be an abolitionist. You didn't have to have capital. You didn't have to be a slave, right? And I see that in this room that we all have this diversity of experiences that we can bring to the table. And that is really encouraging to me to see that you don't have to be in or of or around to be a part of the solution. And I think that is good. I do think though that sometimes I'm discouraged because I feel like as someone who is a woman and someone who is Black, I'm fatigued by having to be responsible for the racism that's inflicted on me, for the sexism that's inflicted on me. I find that it is, when we talk about accountability and we talk about, you know, who is responsible, I don't think necessarily it's Black people's problems to solve racism, right? Like, white people have to do that. Like, white people have to step up to the plate. White people have to be able to relinquish their power. Now, I also understand that power concedes nothing without demands, like, and that's where Black people come into play and allies come into play. But I do think that, you know, when I'm looking at the abolitionist movement, I think about how all throughout the antebellum period, there was no new piece of legislation that benefited them. Every piece of new law policy that came out favored slaveholders. And it wasn't until the Civil War, and it wasn't until the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment that you got federal change. And then it wasn't until 100 years later where you get like the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act and the Equal Housing Act. I mean, I think about that, I'm like, oh God, I can't wait another 100 years for something else to change. I think we really need to be thinking about policy. Yes, the community is so important, but we need policy changes at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and even more so at the international level. You know, thinking about things that Juan was saying, the things that happen in this country have larger implications for what happens outside and in other places. And so I got a lot on my mind. I got a lot of notes. But I feel like I said, there's a lot that encouraged me and that I'm taking away. But there's also a lot of work to do and a lot of risk involved in that work. And I think that's something that I'm constantly grappling with, is how much am I willing to make myself uncomfortable or make others uncomfortable in order to make those changes.
So we're gonna mix it up again a little bit, and Beverly, you're up. We'll come down this side. Eric, you get a reprieve for a little bit. We're coming your way.
I will just say ditto everyone else's sentiments about the appreciation for the space. It definitely has helped me think about how to even structure some of my work going forward. One of the things that struck me the most was the conversation yesterday afternoon with the folks from Detroit, and seeing manifested a collective movement that was de-siloed, that was really seemed like it was both sort of organically and intentionally created, where people are coming together across communities, across organizations, really raised a lot of things for me about, to Ray's point, what makes that work here, and how can we get more of that in other places? Because I do feel like what we need is a concerted and decentralized movement where we can all be working collaboratively. And something that somebody said about, I don't know if this was the phrase, but I took it as, sort of thinking about the nonprofit industrial complex, and what do we need to be doing to, as much as we can, sort of decolonize, decapitalize our work, so that we're relying less on competition and individualism. That felt like that was a piece of that puzzle that was coming together. And for me, one of the things that we haven't talked about that relates to that is how do we, and also relates to what Catherine said first, was how do we not mobilize in crisis, which is what I feel like our organization is doing all the time. And we talk about it, but we don't know how to get out of it. And so what is a sustained movement that is not based in crisis? And I think it needs to be based in our vision for what can be. But I don't feel like that gets articulated enough. So how do we get to that so that we can be painting a picture for people about what this looks like? So some of what I was seeing from folks in Detroit was kind of starting to get me there. And then one thing I wanted to just say about the definition of violence, which we organizationally have a really broad definition of violence, but we also struggle with it because we are also seeing the internalization of that becoming kind of, I don't know, bastardized in a way where now violence is being used for everything. And so part of my struggle too with this definition is how it's being used as a weapon against each other in community. And I don't know exactly what to do with that, but, just wanted to put
I
that
think
out
we're gonna
there.
have to return to this topic. And I'm just mindful that time is expanding to incorporate lots of thoughts, and we do have things we want to get to, so if we could be concise, the remainder of our participation, that would be great. Peter.
First, just express the gratitude others have expressed. The things that struck me the most was this combination of this idea, can the state transform itself, with the first discussion we had about this notion of being forced to get change. There's sort of an interesting set of discussions that can be triggered from that. The thing I'd like to see more of, I wish we could have a little bit more time to actually process the discussion we had about Detroit. And I think very intentionally, so we were looking at successes and models. But there are ways in which things are happening in Detroit that I think are also very different. Different challenges exist here. And one of those is the notion that in Detroit and other cities, not Chicago, not New York, the lack of density is an important issue. So how do we think about the exercise of social control in areas of abandonment? In many respects, I believe that the abandonment itself is a means of social control. Right? So I think historically when labor was valued, then what you had is social control being physical and violent. And what you're seeing now in Detroit, and I would imagine other cities of declining population are similar, you're seeing the very abandonment of neighborhoods, social control. And something we didn't highlight yesterday was some very important work going on under what's called the Project Greenlight in Detroit, which is a master bandwidth system now being put out in a public-private type of partnership, which is now being combined as forms of facial recognition. So we have the idea of abandonment as a means of social control, and then relatively lower cost forms of technology to be surveilling folks to make sure they're behaving in ways that you want them to. So I just say there's a lot of amazing things happening in Detroit, which is why we shall come back. But that I think warrants itself further discussion in terms of thinking about what that means, as well as important community activism around that. There's been some really amazing community education and pushback and exercise of power trying to change those facts on the ground.
Thank you for brevity, Ms. Ray.
Thank you. Also, we'll try to be very quick, but I guess also kind of deep to secret for people. One is to say, it kind of struck me for a moment when you said like the distrust of academics is real and something that we need to grapple with. I had to go like, oh yeah, that's right. And the reason was because when I got my job at University of Chicago, somebody said, it's not the worst thing that can happen to you, because I was so upset about it when I got tenure, and somebody said, now you get to have this job for the rest of your life. I actually cried. I was like, no, because of the way that those titles can separate us from being able to actually access communities, because it comes with, it can be such a barrier to developing trust. And I guess the rest of kind of this is largely a conversation with Ray. And it's about the issues of language. And as Kim said, we are playing an inside-outside game. And that's what a lot of our language is often about, playing that inside-outside game. And being able to have enough trust to be able to say, when I say an oppressed community, and I'm talking to you, this is what I mean, and being able to know that when I say an oppressed community over here, and more kind of this, if you were the state, this is what I mean, but I need you to know what I mean when I say it over here, because this is the relationship that I really need to keep and maintain in the work that I want to do. And so what I want to say is, one of the things that came out for me was shifting from using disadvantaged community to oppressed community, and to say, I'm going to use oppressed community, and I'm going to use it because what I want to do in terms of the conversation that happened yesterday is to keep calling out the fact, the role of the state in creating and maintaining the resource constraints on the communities that we want to work with and want to try to change. But I need you to know that that's why I'm using oppressed community, is not because that community is not strong and cannot do a lot of work for itself, but I want that community to get all of the advantages that my advantaged community gets. And so what those other communities do is organize themselves in ways to get as much resources as possible from the state. And so I don't want your community to heal itself. I want your community to make the state give it the resources to account for all of the reasons why it's placed it and kept it in the position it's in. So I want us to understand that that's why when I turn this way, I'm using oppressed community. And so that just how that we need to be both intentional about language and intentional that we've communicated why we're using language in particular ways.
Eric?
All right, speaking of the mentioned here distrust and researchers, academia, I find that interesting because I don't know if you're all aware there's some distrust in the criminal justice system. But it just comes down to it's distrust in systems, right? From financial institutions, educational, medical field, and obviously criminal justice where there's been the largest impact. For me, what I've really taken away so far is my mind has clearly been stretched in a lot of areas. That's always good, that's always healthy. And that only happens when we're all outside of our comfort zone a little bit. What I would like to see is perhaps our minds stretch a little bit more, and I'm gonna kind of give you some prompting things to think about. One is, I do believe, for example, the triple bottom line that many of us talk about, where we do ceasefire, for example, and for us it works. A lot of the right program fidelity has to be there, the right people have to be along. But I think when we talk about the triple bottom line, that we've been working a lot in Stockton, and I think we can all agree with the triple bottom line. What is that? It's reducing homicides, violent crime. It's reducing arrests and incarceration, and it's increasing trust in systems in the criminal justice system. And so when we're all going for that, they're all related too, right? And I think we know that. So, for example, we have the Stockton Alliance for Equity, which is myself, the district attorney, public defender. We're all on the same page to take this trust work and move it into the entire criminal justice system. Communities at the forefront, obviously. In fact, how did we even get to do ceasefire? Again, we did it once before and we didn't stick with it correctly and it failed. This is years ago. Why did we do it again? Because the community came forward and said, we need to do this. And their voice was very loud. And it was actually one of the peak organizations that said, you're going to do this work, or we're going to do it with you. And that's what kicked it off for us. And we've been doing it right. And we're seeing results. I would also like to stretch our minds and throw this prompt out too. Yesterday or the day before, police unions were painted as bad people, and I didn't say anything at the time. Hey, I'm managing at their labor. We disagree on things. There's a certain relationship there. But what did we do? We labeled them, right? All as one group. And I would just say this. I wouldn't be able to do the racial reconciliation work I've done in Stockton without their leadership. They're an informal leadership in the department. I'm the formal leadership. There's got to be a leadership sandwich to actually infuse things into culture and to make systems change. And when I talk about racial reconciliation, that's the work we're doing with the National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice really quickly. I go forward I started first with my communities of color, the Black Leadership Council, and ACP groups like that, and made the acknowledgements that of the harms that policing has done in America. Going back from slave patrols to enforcing Jim Crow laws, through civil rights, the suppression of rights, violent acts that were done, to more recent injustices, right? And that cracked open meaningful dialogue in my communities where town halls weren't working, regular community meetings weren't working. That cracked open some amazing dialogue that's really changed the trust dynamic in Stockton. One thing that made that successful was my police union leadership was there with me on that. And that may shock some of you. But if they were to undermine those efforts, and I've seen that happen in other jurisdictions, it wouldn't have been very successful. So guess what's happening now too? They are doing, when I say they, line level police officers out on the streets, not just the leader, the department are out doing these same discussions. So I just don't want us to write off police unions as bad people that are always in the way. Let's use them to our benefit.
Keith, reflections and hopes.
Good morning. I've taken away at least 3 fairly specific things. One was understanding the science behind why talking through and about traumatic experiences helps us move past them. That was, for the work I do, it's been really I want to just go right back to work after the share is finished, because I need to jump on that. And another thing is just the importance of really supporting local solutions in a way that hasn't always happened. And the last thing is about the importance of using very specific and clear language what we're trying to communicate and trying to impact. Terms like violence, this is a violence roundtable, and all agree what violence is. Or trauma, or healing. We throw that around a lot. And we pursue that, but we don't all agree what that looks like. And on that point, something that Joe mentioned I have to pick up on, which was talked about how using a term like defendant is critical from sort of an early stage, because with that comes a lot of rights and protection, process protection. People I work with, my conversations inside a parole hearing are with prosecutors and parole commissioners. Help them understand this man was a defendant 30 years ago. He's Mr. Jones, and that's his family we're trying to get him home to. It's a very different conversation. And context is everything. But these kind of conversations allow us to consider those different perspectives, and I really value that. One thing that I would say I'd like to see more of, this really came up for me really clearly last night, and Daniel mentioned this earlier, but we are trying to reimagine justice. We're trying to create something that has never really existed. And what's missing is a much more prominent role of the artists and creative people who can see something none of us can see. And I want to see them be sort of in the middle of this process.
Kim, reflections on roundtable discussion and hopes for the day before we.
I just want to echo the appreciation for the diversity of the space. As I said, I sit at a lot of roundtables, but they're usually just academics, just the community, just policymakers. So there are a lot of these tables that are happening without this mix. What I also appreciate, because having sat in those in different tables, is that they will have, I think, because there's a push to have someone with a lived experience at the table. And sometimes it feels very performance driven. It feels obligatory. It feels like, let's do this because we should. And I say this to my colleagues here in academics in particular, that there is, when there's an immersion in a certain piece of work and there's a sense that we understand this community, then we will bring someone to affirm what we've been saying. That happens in those spaces. And so my challenge when we talk about the distrust, that even folks who are not in that space, this did not feel like performance. This did not feel like these are people who are bolstering hypotheses that we have made about our work, and they're going to come and reaffirm what we said. That being said, my hope for moving forward is that when we convene such tables, that is the expectation, is that people are going to come. And what I'd like to see is more challenging. I think there was a point yesterday. I think there was the truncated piece of the observer said around gender, and we hurried up at the end because there were things that were said that I was ready to be like, oh, whoa. From not the perspective as a prosecutor, the perspective as a survivor. As a perspective as someone who does this work. And it was very quickly like, let's just move this on because this is controversial, but that was the whole point of doing this. It's also why I start every conversation about where I sit, that I hold a bunch of different spaces, because again, for academics, researchers, prosecutors, law enforcement, we come with a title, but if we are not allowed to challenge all of the things that we hold together, without fear of what that conversation will be, I think we've missed the robustness of it. Very quickly, I think, even as we talk about vocabulary and language, reimagining justice, justice means different things to different people. And I think there are people, and we've acknowledged this in this room, and perhaps that diversity of thought hasn't been here, but this works just fine. That this is actually perfect. That this is all these things that we're talking about needing to be changed, it does not. That is unfathomable. And again, I have the unique vantage point from politics that I represent Cook County, which we talk largely in this space about violence. We're talking about certain segments of Cook County. There are other segments of my county who are incredibly angry and frustrated that I am talking about violence in the way that I am. There are other segments of my county who believe that we should be doing more incarceration. And so I don't want us to have this notion that there is a uniformity of what this looks like, a uniformity of community, because we've been using the phrase community a lot, what the community wants. And my pushback is what your community wants. So what your community wants. Because I go to a lot of different communities. And again, it is heartbreaking at times and infuriating at others. That there are some people who want more people in your community to be locked up, who want to encourage the police coming after the painting of the poles. And so because there is not that consistency, that dialogue at the end with Paul about oppressors and the like, it's a real conversation that we have to have, because I do believe in community power. I do believe in resiliency and pride and all of that. But I also know that the levers of power, when they decide who is going to sit and make policies, that there are people who are out there who are actively trying to oppress the community. And we need to be honest about that. And so lastly, I mentioned in all of the circles, politics, it matters. It absolutely matters. And not like big P politics, but how we engage. I think it's Joe who was talking about the right and how the language that they need to hear. That's a thing. That is an actual thing. And if we are so entrenched in the belief of the outside, and back to Paul's point, without recognizing what happens on the inside or how those decisions are being made, we can convene all we want. I mean, I agree with Kelly's point about the diversity of the coalition that has to move this along. But if there's not any real intentionality about changing politics or changing policymakers, we'll keep doing this, and it will take 100 years for us to get a diversified, enough people on a court or enough people in a body. And we have to have some intentionality around that. And the last thing, I promise, is, and I said this yesterday, there's an arrogance that comes when you do the work wherever you come from for a really long time. And what I have seen in the last couple of days is some checking of that arrogance, and everyone has it, whether, again, your community really, really well, and so you ain't gonna tell me what my people need, or you have researched this issue for so long, and I know this model works because I've seen it, or I've been to a number of these convenings, and so I know. I think we need to check our arrogance in places like this. I think we need to check and because I think for a period that I was in this yesterday, that there was a tension of ego about experience that wasn't allowing the space for the other experience to permeate. There was an ego about, I know this, and therefore, the challenge to this has to be broken down because I'm defending what I know and not listening to what others are adding to the space. So that is my hope for the.
Wise words, wise words. Merritt. Then, Barbara, you're gonna be next, but then we're gonna go down this way. We're gonna end with Ken's. Yeah.
Child, that feels right.
That feels right? You like it? We can move it around. Maybe we'll start with Ken. Eric.
So I'm grateful for everyone in the space and what you represent and what everyone has contributed. I think it's been rich, both intellectually and spiritually. So I truly am grateful for everyone's contributions. Whether or not I agree with, but I do think it helps mold and shape different movement, different perspective and ways of thinking. So I appreciate that. Takeaways for me, one, great relationship building. And I think it's key as we have these types of roundtables to stay in contact with each other, meet great people, remain organized, and support one another from afar. So I definitely want to extend that to all of the great brothers and sisters that I've met from Detroit, but then I've also met some new folks from Chicago, and elsewhere, Dallas, and DC, to just name a few. And I've also met a lot of people that are observers. So I think, that type of contact exchange, where we can be resources to each other is powerful, and mobilizing what I see as a national movement that's not just taking off, that is in motion and growing. Your neurobiology piece was good for me. I think that was a nice takeaway, and I thank you for that contribution. I'm in a lot of spaces similar to this, but in different, not necessarily roundtable, different situations. And I think I hover between street outreach, academia, government, and agencies by design. I work in the mayor's office, so I'm in all of those spaces. And in those spaces, I've heard DAs refer to individuals that have been arrested as poison. We extracted X amount of poison from a community. I've heard, precinct commanders and chief of, name it, calling neighborhoods hotspots or impact zones, or those things. And it's like this militarized type of language that then leads to that type of action. And not only how you view community, but view people. And that's how they're going to address and approach those individuals. So I thought that was really key to discuss, but also giving me more language around that. Because I will check anybody, but in doing that, I'm not using the terminology. What conversation? I didn't hear much about environmental design and what that looks like in terms of public safety. And I thought that's a key area that we can focus in on. I want to say you did bring it up today around a lot of blight that you may see in community and what that does, and or in places that are densely populated, like in New York City, how we have neighborhoods within neighborhoods because of the design of public housing or other spaces. So really looking at environmental design to do that more. And violence as a learned behavior, and really looking at exposure to violence and what that does to individuals, and what are the points of intervention when we look at it through the lens that violence is learned.
So we're in the home stretch here. We're spending a little extra time doing this, and I know we're behind on our schedule because of the richness of what I heard from you during the day and at night. And it just seemed like there was a lot of gold in those hills. I want to just extract it before we move on with our agenda. So you know the plan here is to really speak to each other in ways that this is not your typical conference, right? This is something deeper going on here. I wanted to spend some time with it. So
Jeremy and Danielle has joined us too.
hi, Danielle. Welcome. I should note, by the way, that the Healing by Choice room is open again and open to 10. And just to note, the number of our colleagues who have had to step out for work that they're doing, Ray had on the first day had observation of something he was doing. Fatima just said that, Danielle said so. So this is talk about having a real and certainly are as they so the Healing by Choice room is open to 10, so just to make that open. So trying to do this as efficiently as we can. So things the one or two things you want to highlight from the last 2 days, and the one thing that you want to make sure we pay attention to before we leave, knowing also, Barb, that we'll come to you at the end of the day.
Thank you all. I've taken so much, away from this as far as everyone's reflections for the past 2 days. Jeremy, you have a hard job. You're facilitating all of this. So, we know that you have to cut the mic when we know we have so much more. But I also want to recognize you in stating on the first day that you wanted this, and everyone, all the organizers, wanted this to be a single, non-scholarly reflection, discussion. And I want us to continue to reinforce that theme, because if we don't reinforce that theme, it continues to exclude people that really need to be at the table that aren't here, period. And the ones that are here, their voice is not being heard. So thank you for that. And Mr. Webster, the distrust of academics, oh my goodness, that's really broad. I think we need to reimagine accountability. It's bigger than reimagining justice, because like Kim said, justice means so many things to so many different people. So that said, well, we gotta walk away with what we do agree on. But if we don't have certain voices at the table, we still exclude those folks that are out of the loop with what we do agree on, and even what we don't agree on. I believe that social justice is a broad term. Violence is included in social justice. We know this is very complex. We know it's very complicated. And the expectations that we all have by being here, all of them are not going to be met. And if we put one thing before we put the other, how do we come up with these solutions that everybody wants? So I have just so many questions as it relates to what everyone has said, but it's a lot of things that we have not talked about because we're all in our specific genre of work. I am not supposed to be sitting at this table. I'm an academic, but I became an academic later on in life because my life experience had to get me to the next level that still is not working because of the distrust that academics have. And I'm so invisible as an academic. No one sees me. So that's another larger discussion that we probably need to have and put on the table as well. But the courage that we all have to call these things out is what I'm so happy, even when it's such a sad situation that we're talking about.
Sure. So many thoughts, so I'll try to be brief. So I think behind this question of language that we keep bringing up is either conscious or unconscious differences in theories of change. And I think it'd be really handy if at some point you were more explicit about what are our theories of change. I think every last one of us has a different one around this table. And that's fine, but it's just about being very explicit about those. I think some of this distrust of academics is because people aren't clear about what is the theory of change. You know, is it building up data reserves so that communities are more empowered to demand change? Is it to get data into a congressional briefing? Different theory of change. Is it to change our hearts and minds? Is it to build a tenure file because you believe in the power of public education? All these different things. And so just being very clear and explicit about the theory of change. I would say going back to the question that Paul put on the table about the role of the state, I'm really intrigued about what that looks like in different city or community contexts. So I think that was a big thing after the Detroit discussion yesterday. I was thinking about how different a place like New York is with more wealth, certain type of city leadership versus a city that feels like it's under colonial occupation. And is coming out of just 6 years ago, a suspended democracy, emergency financial management here in the city. Like Peter has talked about, a billionaire developer who's putting surveillance cameras, police department rolling out surveillance technology. It's a very different, context, and again, a different set of problems and a theory of change for how to change things. I would say lastly, I'm thinking a lot about who's not here. And the fact that as energizing as a lot of this is, I also feel exhausted by criminal justice conversations or anti-violence conversations, and often feel energized by conversations that are happening around the city right now around community benefits agreements, or community land trust, or worker cooperatives, or community solar, and all of those conversations. And so thinking and wanting to challenge myself, why weren't some of those folks brought into this room? Because those are questions of safety, anti-violence, all of that. But how could we expand this even further to bring in people who are really holding a lot of the work?
David?
So on the lesson learned or lesson elevated, mine for this one is that violence is history, and I knew that, and the addition to that knowledge and the reminder of that fact that comes from the account that we were given on the first day of the intergenerational transmission of harm and trauma, even at the neural levels. The insight in David's paper that something that certainly the scholarship has taken for granted, and that lots of us take, if not for granted, is something we despair of doing anything about, which is the presence and role of firearms. All of those are deliberate historical products. The kind of violence that we're here to talk about is the creation of our long national history. It is the creation of white supremacy. It is the creation of deliberate control and harms done to harmed peoples. And we should never forget that. And even though I'm very conscious of it, my understanding of that is expanded and enforced. On the substantive thoughts, I think I'd like to try to cede my time to a future self. Because I have thoughts that I think I want to try to take up at greater length.
Leah, ways from the last couple of days, and something you want to make sure we pay attention to before we break.
Yeah, so I'm always challenged by these spaces, by academia, because I love sort of abstract thought so much, and my work is kind of measured by less dead bodies, more free people. And when that is achieved, there's success. And so I think in spaces like this, the thing that I want to underpin so much is that there is such a richness in thought and perspective that doesn't always land on the ground. And so how do we, academia produced, it produced methods of healing the earth before we got to the point where, we might cease to exist, right? We produce solutions, when I say very, very, very loosely. The spaces produce solutions that don't get enacted. So I guess my challenge is, what do those partnerships look like? And how do you tear down those silos of trust? What are the paths and what are the equalizers? And so I heard somebody talk about humility as something that's necessary. And I think my mom, who was a scholar, she always refers to academia as a higher hall, blah, blah, blah. And it is this reference that intellectual capacity as value in spaces like these are more rich than, something that somebody is less degreed or less astute or less well-read is sharing, and that's not necessarily the case. So how do we think about equalizing? And then the other thing, another distrust, and I think Grace spoke to this yesterday, is how do we share resources, right? Because if I let you in my community and talk to me and my people, and then you go get a $5 million grant, and our work isn't sustainable, and our community has never changed because the goal was just to know. It hasn't benefited my people at all. And then the other thing, which is a vastly different thought that I take away repeatedly from this work, is that we don't really know what success looks like. We don't know what a decolonized state looks like. We don't know, militarization is such a vast thought within our culture that we don't know what the other side of it looks like. And so I think that's it.
In the last couple of days for me, a lot of the takeaways are moving my mind and my brain in various directions. And I appreciate what I'm starting to learn about the undergirding of the civil rights movements and violence, founding violence that Amanda talked about. I'm really going to learn a lot more about gun policy, about the matrix and centering women and girls in my work. And about structural violence, founded violence. But what drew me to this conference, it was not moving my head so much as moving my body and my heart, is interpersonal violence. How do we do that? In that regard, what blew me away the last couple of days was the resilience of communities that suffer interpersonal violence. Because from my perspective, in my work, I deal a lot with mothers who lose their loved ones to police violence. In Bakersfield, California, there's a family that I've been working with whose grandfather, Francisco Serna, was killed by police because they thought he had a gun in his hand and he was outside his house. It was a crucifix. We don't hear enough about Francisco Serna. Interpersonal violence, from my family perspective, I have family members who we're doing decades for interpersonal violence, gang-related murder. So what blew me away the last 2 days was the resilience of communities that suffer violence. It's seeing the marker. It's hearing about those painted poles. Thank you. It's hearing the words of Halim, how he talks about love. It's learning about the holiday lights that Jamal talks about. That's my biggest takeaway. What makes me feel that I can look at communities that suffer violence, including my own, especially my own, and have hope that we can have resilience to overcome it. What I'd like to see, this is not exactly what I like to see, it won't be developed profoundly because we don't have time. But I'd like to see it and know about resources that can deal with healing that are anchored and centered, Black and brown structures, indigenous African structures, structures that we know from the same community that suffer so much from state violence, they probably have the answers. That just gotta be guided to the right way, right resources that can use that.
And this.
What I'd like to see more of is, I think I want to circle back to this conversation about philanthropy. It's been invoked a couple times, directly or indirectly.
Conversation about
Philanthropy, which I think has been invoked a couple times directly and indirectly this morning, everyone brought it up yesterday. And I just want to spend a beat on it because I don't understand, but though every time it's brought up as like a hopeful thing. The thing is the alternative to save resources. Except if we think philanthropy is going to save us, like we should definitely talk about that. Because I think in the same sort of systemic issues of race, like we should have a conversation. Like it's not an accident. Some things get funded and some things don't. So I just want to spend a beat and circle back to that. And I'll be brief because I think one thing I'm also learning is that I'm trying to at times in this conversation listen more than I talk. Like everybody here, I struggle with, but I think it's important.
And then we're going to switch back to our, we want to go back to
Danielle.
Danielle will have the same opportunity. You got the two questions, takeaways from the last couple of days, not multiple, one, maybe two, and hopes for today.
And I'm sorry, I'm late. One of our participants was arrested and sadly beaten by the police who were not letting his mother talk to him to ensure his injuries weren't life-threatening. So I just wasn't back into the room to leave that. And he seems to be okay, but I very much had this conversation with you in the course of those hours. I think my two quick takeaways. One is I think I agree very much with Amanda and Grace Lee Boggs that I feel sorry for all of us who don't live in Detroit. It's just been really extraordinary to get to learn from and bear witness to a lot of the work that's happening here. And in a context with far fewer financial resources that are present elsewhere. So it's just really deepened my excitement and regard for this place. I think the other thing is I was so grateful for the consistency of our focus on power in a conversation about violence. I've been to so many roundtables about violence that only talk about interpersonal violence as though it is the product of specific new relationships. So it's ahistorical, it's out of the context of power. And I think having those conversations that way is probably a large part of why our solutions remain too small. And so I'm just really grateful for everybody for the original framing of the conversation, everybody who held that as the centerpiece of the conversation of what it will take to end violence. I found that very helpful. The thing I would love more of, they are related to each other, is just more conversation about, I almost want to call it land, right? So whether that's gentrification for us in New York, whether it's housing stock and mortgage crises in other places, but people's ability to stay in a place when they choose to or leave a place when they want to, which I think is so central to so many of the safety concerns we see. And really, and as we think about sort of the original founding violence of this land, like really understanding a through line about land ownership, possession, and control as being really intricately related to violence. And I think related to that, the thing that I'm always eager to learn more of is like how we can be actual use to each other across geography, like how the things we know where we are can be valuable other than by parachuting in and telling people we know things they don't know about the place they have known forever. But also not presuming that there is nothing that we can share with one another that could foster real safety and growth. And so really trying to learn what our
how our movement works across geography in a way that is respectful of place, of local wisdom, and also doesn't miss opportunities for us to build with each other.
There's some reflections on
Yeah, two quick thoughts, and that was so rich. I feel I don't have a lot to add to it actually, and one is coming into this meeting. Certainly within the Square One group, we had been sort of talking about an idea of civilianizing safety. It's the language that we had used, and that was language that we had found very influential coming out of New York City and the work that Eric is doing and others are doing there. And I think over the course of this meeting, we heard that reflected in people's summaries just now. There's lots of other language to get at a very similar idea, and it's fundamentally about a shift of power from state to the community. And we talked a lot yesterday about what community-led strategies would look like. I think listening to our reflections, the issue for me is not so much what community-led strategies would look like, but what is going to be the relationship between the state and the community? And what is going to be the relationship between community actors, community organisations, criminal justice agencies, our mayor's offices, and our courts, and so on, and how does a community take its place within the agencies of the state? So the state agencies are not some external force that the community must deal with. And to me, that's an evolution that is, I feel I've sort of moved forward in my thinking from where I was coming into the meeting. And I think that is in significant part due to hearing the experience of what's happened to Detroit. And I'm very grateful for learning about that experience. I feel I've learned something important about that. And I think that's something we can take on at Square One. That's one set of issues. Second set of issues, I think in many ways, as we talk about the relationship between different kinds of community representatives and academics, which was a big theme here. That was a surprise to me too, by the way. I did not, coming in today, coming into this meeting, I did not expect that to be a significant theme in our discussion. I've learned something from that. So that relationship, language, short-term and long-term, and I think we've actually talked about that in a number of different ways this morning too. These are all discussions about politics, and I really like and appreciate that we're talking about politics in a very direct way. I feel we've been a long time in coming. This is how I'm hearing it. When we talk about the relationship between community representatives of different kinds and academics, I think this is a discussion about coalition building, and we're trying to figure out what this relationship can productively look like. I think as academics, we haven't fully acknowledged at this table that we have not always been on the right side of history by any means. And this is an unfamiliar relationship for academics to be trying to work closely and constructively with community representatives. Typically, our partner is a government partners. That's where the power and the money has been, and you know that's a magnet for people in universities. And as a consequence, academics have often been really on the wrong side of a lot of issues and have caused a lot of harm. And I think that has to be acknowledged and understood as part of the context for distrust on the part of communities with the academic community. But I think ultimately this is a discussion about you know, what this coalition might look like, and I think it's important. And Kim and Alea, I think, have given us some guideposts about how we can do this productively, and we have to come into this. And on the academic side, you know, this is not our natural posture, but we have to come into this process with a lot of humility. I think, no, I heard you both saying that, and I thought that was right on. Language, code switching, right? We talk a lot about code switching and translation. I think we're learning that everyone has to become competent at code switching. Academics have to become competent at code switching, understanding the context in which they're in, and being very intentional about how they communicate and use language. If you want to sit at a table like this and be a partner in a process like this, you have to be very aware of the context you're in and very, very deliberate about the language that you use. And this is political, right? This is how we can function more effectively. Trying to make the change we want. Short-term, long-term, for me, this issue was coming up in all sorts of ways as we were going around the table. The only observation I'd make here, because there are pragmatic things we want to do tomorrow, and there are long-term goals that we want to be able to reflect on 5 generations from now, as Amanda said when we started on Thursday. And I think the only thing here is that I take away is whatever it is we do tomorrow, we don't want that to get in the way of where we want to be 5 generations from now. And so whatever it is we do tomorrow, we don't want to be undermining that long-term project. One tiny little plug, Amanda rightly said, you know, I would have loved to have seen, you know, where is the discussion about worker cooperatives, all the environmental justice work that's going on. And I think this is very much going to be on our agenda for the next roundtable. So just wanted to flag that I agree that that's of first-rate importance, and we're going to get there.
Thank you. Thank you all. Please pull out your agenda. I want to tell you how we modified our remaining time together to allow for the conversation that we just had. We've all been there. It's typical to end the conference on a 1-day conference or a 2 or 3-day conference and leave without having had the opportunity that we just had to hear from each other as to what we're taking away from it. Hence, setting aside an hour for us to do that means that we're borrowing time from other parts of the agenda, and I want to just let you know how we're going to do that. Each of the segments that we set aside for discussion on public health, the first one and the second one on domestic violence, each will be an hour rather than an hour and a half. So we'll go from now 11 to 12, starting with Daniel Webster's 10 minutes, and clarifying questions, just as we've done before, ending at noon. Means that we're going to take a break at noon. For those who can't wait that long, you know what I mean? Feel free to get up and do what has to be done before. So I know we're moving the break back half an hour. We'll take a break at noon, 12:15, come back. Barbara also had an opportunity yesterday to set up some of her discussion with her story. So I feel that in essence, we incorporate that by reference. And from 12:15 to 1:15, we'll have her, she'll get us started. Then we'll have this really important discussion on healing, which many of you referenced as being important, both a takeaway and hope from the day is that we can go deeper on what that means. And Barbara will help us do that. Bruce has already done a good part of the summary, but I'll also ask him to summarize what we hear between now and then. And the really important thing is boxed lunches will be provided at 1:30. So you know what we're heading toward, which is lunch, food. So something that keep us going, but feel free to get coffee and the restroom in the meantime. Is that okay with everybody? If we make those modifications, slight ones, and I hope that Daniel and Barbara recognize the value of the time that we took from them for a larger group purpose. Before we turn over to Daniel and Tom, because he's next to me, he didn't have to do the assistant wave. He handed me a napkin with his assistant wave written on it. I want to make an observation before we turn over to Daniel Webster.
So I appreciate whoever put me next to Jeremy and Tyler there. It had its purpose.
Taking full advantage of it.
Taking full advantage of it. I can speak when I want to speak. But I just want to say, so it'd be clear for me that I don't have nothing against academia and researchers, none of that, because I have a much appreciation for the data and the numbers and the research. So I want to be clear about that so that we know that. I just think a lot of times the perceived distrust comes from the fact that most people on the bottom, or most people believe that some people get awards while others get rewards. And so we got to figure out how to make sure that those rewards is partnered with those who get the awards. I think, that's kind of the basis of that perceived mistrust, because I don't have a distrust, but I love the numbers. I read every paper. So I love the numbers. I just feel that we have to marry it too. So I just want to say that.
Thank you. Daniel, get us started. And again, thanks for your patience in allowing us to do the group work that was, I think, important.
I appreciate it. Obviously, I'm going to assume that folks have read the paper. I'm going to summarize some key points, give a little bit of framing, and also mention a few things that I recognize as omissions that I do plan to address in a final form of the paper. I began my career late 80s, just when the whole idea of public health addressing violence was becoming really new. We were trying to figure out, well, what the hell does that mean? Public health is such an incredibly diverse, interdisciplinary activity that be very suspicious of anyone who says, here is the public health approach, right? There are probably dozens of public health approaches. So what you are going to hear from today is, honestly, Daniel Webster's public health approach. Take it for whatever it is there. I intentionally constrained this discussion in my paper around gun violence as opposed to more broadly violence. Obviously, there are public health approaches to violence more generally, that have absolutely nothing to do with guns or gun violence. So I just want to recognize so, but it was intentional, that restriction, not only because I want to play where I know the material best, but truly, I think it is appropriate, given the astronomical impacts that guns have on violence, and also on justice and on criminal justice. I'm going to get back to that in just a moment. What I present in the paper, in rough terms, is one set of approaches that come from an understanding of research of evidence of environmental conditions that appear to promote lethal violence in particular. And so the public health response to those conditions often involve advocacy, policy, community mobilization to address those environmental conditions. The things that I focused on in this paper, and I could have gone broader, I recognize that, again, and something to constrain this, was focused on guns, alcohol, and I'll just use the term blight very generally to address decaying infrastructure and conditions in neighborhoods and public health responses in those three places. And then the other thing that I try to address, you could describe as behavioral approaches, behavioral interventions, more on the ground work that recognizes that, yeah, there are these environmental constraints and issues, but right now we need to do what we can to address the people most at risk for being involved in violence and promote some behavioral and supportive interventions that are going to lead to less lethal violence. So just to summarize very briefly, on the gun policy front, and I'll focus first on sort of the supply side of the issue. We have a lot of already published data, more coming out very soon, showing pretty strong effects of requiring licensing in order to purchase firearms. If I'm convinced of anything, I'm convinced that that substantially reduces homicides, suicides, and both directions of violence by and towards law enforcement officers. We also find that something that David alludes to in his paper of real profound changes in public policy around concealed gun carrying over the past 30 years. Even though it was discussed, and in some ways you could appropriately say this is allowed law-abiding or legal gun owners to bring their guns into more public spaces, even though as a group you can say they are relatively low risk, that they were going to do something bad with them. It's been a horrible social experiment in the sense that a lot more people have experienced violent crime and died as a result of that. On the alcohol front, something hardly, I said violence, and we hardly ever talk about alcohol. The available evidence about connections to alcohol abuse and violence are vast. It's a big, big problem. And there are policy solutions to them. The neighborhoods most impacted by violence, including gun violence, have a overdensity of alcohol outlets in their communities that are causing more harm than helping anything, without a doubt. And when that is constrained, through licensing and policy approaches, both in terms of number of outlets, in terms of the hours that they're allowed to operate, there is less violence. There's also some evidence, although most of this is more in an international context, that alcohol taxes also lead to less violence. Let me then get to the set of policies and what we know about interventions that aren't trying to change environment, but are trying to change behaviors. And some of those interventions involve law enforcement, some involve no law enforcement, and some a blend, okay? So let me start with, I guess, I wanted to say the most pure public health approach, but I actually don't believe that. But the approach that has nothing to do with law enforcement, that most people think of as a program with a brand name now, pure violence, outreach, violence interruption, conflict mediation. It is the foundation upon what Eric and his team has built up to be of something much more robust that you can think of as pure violence 2.0 or 3 or whatever number you want to put on it. And there are success stories with that model, without a doubt. But there's also some evidence of times when it hasn't worked out, and a lot of times those have been involved, quite frankly. And so one of the, I think, takeaways going forward, where we're talking about a pure violence model or even a group violence intervention model or focused deterrence, whatever label you want to put on that approach, is not only what you do, but how you do it. That could matter a lot, both with respect to public safety outcomes, like how many people get shot, but at least on the group violence intervention or focused deterrent dimension. What is that? What are the outcomes with respect to incarcerated individuals? What's the police violence, those sorts of things, I think have largely been unmeasured, sadly. So pure violence, really some great success stories, and I present and highlight what I consider the most evolved dimension of that with the work in New York City. And on the group violence intervention, I kind of hold up the Oakland model. And of course, what Oakland has done is more than just group violence intervention. It is a really transformation of a very community-led approach that went all in, I believe, with respect to helping the individuals at greatest risk of involving in violence, which I think, again, is an orientation that Eric and others in New York City have taken on as well. So there's some similarities and differences in these models. And hopefully we're not done. We're going to continue evolving it better. But I think that the takeaways are it has to be very focused, has to, this will be over medicalized, but the dosage has to be sufficient. I've seen too many times where it's very superficial assistance that is brought forward. And I loved hearing some of the examples from Detroit, for example, that we're trying to, and are well beyond the more superficial assistance. The last thing I want to talk about, because I recognize the most controversial, and thing in the paper is what do we do about gun possession, illegal gun possession from a law enforcement standpoint? On the one hand, there's pretty strong and consistent evidence that when you have very focused efforts on trying to deter and curb illegal gun carrying, that the result is that fewer people get shot. Fewer people get shot in the communities most impacted by gun violence. Just as a case with group violence intervention, however, the research it really has never done a deep dive of, well, what are the other implications or outcomes from those efforts in addition to fewer shootings in the short term? Were there bad long-term effects or bad short-term effects with respect to community trust and policing? So we need to get far beyond thinking about this, oh, this is just broad stop, question, frisk, oppressive, aggressive style policing. And I believe anyway, try to reimagine a process for trying to constrain gun carrying that is far, far, far more focused and far more transparent and accountable and community determined in essence. The communities most impacted by violence, and you know, I know that both from other research, but research I've done in Baltimore with surveys and focus groups in impacted communities, that they are both over-policed in this broad racially biased style of stop and frisk, and they are under-policed, they will say is, but they're really not focusing on the people who are driving the violence, and they're not solving murders, right? So I think that's the place we need to get is what does the community want from law enforcement? And I believe very strongly that they want them to focus on gun violence and do that in the most focused and transparent way possible. So I'll end it on that. That's the Daniel Webster view of this, that other public health folks don't want to talk about law enforcement other than that it's bad. In working in Baltimore, I tell you, I understand the bad part of the criminal justice system. I understand it very well. But following Freddie Gray's death and following the uprising from that, I felt I could have just stepped away and said, had nothing to do with that. I'm gonna get as far away from Baltimore police as I can. I sort of felt that, no, I need to do the opposite. I need to try to embed and try to push reforms internally and externally, because I fundamentally believe that when you have a totally dysfunctional police department, the work done in communities is far harder. I tell you that based upon talking to the violence interrupters, that they cannot effectively do what they do if law enforcement is not focused in the way that I just described. So there's an interdependency here of proper reforms, in my view. I'm gonna stop it there.
Thank you, Daniel. So open the floor for not discussion, but for clarifying questions first. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
These aren't clear.
If it's not a clarifying question, I appreciate you waiting. Is yours a clarifying question, Juan? And Bruce, clarifying? Okay. Clarifying question? Beverly, okay. We'll start with Juan, then Bruce, and Beverly. Direct them to Daniel, and let's make this as succinct as possible. As succinct as possible, because we do want to have a general discussion. Juan?
Daniel, your very last point just now about in Baltimore, particularly after Freddie Gray's death, that without a police focus violence interrupters are not as effective. Do you mean that violence interrupters work better when stop and frisk activities are increased? What did you mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, I'm glad you asked that. No, what I meant more is that Baltimore police have to be more effective in focusing on the most violent individuals, their gun and their gun use, both in a proactive way and in essence to solve murders. Because if they believe there is no consequence for routinely being armed and ready to shoot at any provocation or even after the fact, it's much harder to convince somebody, because how do you trust that everybody's not out to get you, because you're living in a city and in a set of conditions that is very warlike, and you are going to respond ready to go to war. So I think that a whole bunch of things have happened, some long-term and some short-term, that have made the police very ineffective in addressing violent behavior.
I'm gonna keep moving this along. Put your tent down. Does that mean you don't have a clarifying question?
No, I got two, and they're quick.
Okay. Let's do this. Let's get all the questions in the room at the same time, and Daniel can figure out how to sort through them. Bruce, and then Beverly, and then Beth.
No, I'm sorry, mine's not clarifying.
Mine's not clarifying.
You're not clarifying? Okay, just wait if you would.
Okay.
Daniel, you mentioned the violence reducing effect of licensing. How big is that effect? That's one question. Second question, I'm very, very interested in the uneven effects of cure violence, why it fails in some settings and why it's more successful in others. Dosage was mentioned as one thing. A failure of policing. I want to understand better what that failure of policing is as a source of a failure of cure violence. Are there other things that we can say? Is there something more general we can say about the conditions under which it appears to be more effective than others?
Thank you. Are you showing off your pipe cleaner?
And then,
you do win the award. I mean, look at Candace. Look what she's done.
It's outrageous.
There you go.
Are you asking for more?
No,
That's sad.
Yeah, thank you for your good thing.
Jeremy, can I just say too, my cure violence question, I would love, I know there's
that would be a general
a lot of experience around the table.
I'm sure lots of people have, on all of us have lots to say. Hence going up quickly. Beverly, clarifying question, and then Daniel, you can answer those two.
Also related to the licensing point, were you saying that the licensing has also brought about a decrease in gun violence by police? So that's what I thought I heard, and I wanted to hear more about that.
Okay, just if you could help us with those two, and then we'll open it up, and we'll start with Fatima.
Yeah,
first, and then Beth, and then Rob. Yep.
So I'll start with the licensing. So size of effects. They range in the published research, and we have more data coming out. So the range of effects have been from 11% reductions in gun homicides to 40%. As we're getting more and more observations, they seem to be centering around 30% reductions in gun homicide, pretty substantial. I don't know of any other particularly broad public policies. It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to do something very intensive in one little community. But if you think about statewide reductions in gun homicides, it's pretty large. Even though our conversation has not been about suicide, I'll tell you that the effects are just as large on suicide. And because gun suicides are far more common than gun homicides, most of the lives prevented, from licensing actually suicides. So this is not a small thing, okay, from a public health standpoint, and with violence, both inter and intrapersonal violence. To get to your question about effects as it relates to police. So the data on that right now are less clear than the other measures that I mentioned, general homicides in the community, suicides of law enforcement shot in line of duty. There are a couple of papers out. We intend to do more on this, but the papers show that the states with the strongest set of gun controls compared to the less strong gun controls, there's like a twofold difference with respect to the population rate of civilians shot and killed by police. And if you look at the subset that has generally the strongest gun laws, the common denominator is a strong licensing process for handgun purchasers. So more, I think, will be revealed, but I think it is highly consistent with everything that we are seeing. So I'll just end it at that. Variable effects of pure violence. Yeah, I'm still wrestling with this, and I think that.
But let's just, you made a statement that they're variable. I think Bruce is right, there will be a discussion, I hope, about interventions, pure violence, interventions, and others. So let's just hope that this comes up in the group discussion. Sure. So, fine, if you would please get the discussion going, and then Beth, and then Ron.
I want to talk about the field of health, the industry of health, because I think it's important. I mentioned to add there's the analysis of public health, which I think is really important methodology, sets of questions they ask. But health has a history, and I think in the way that the activists and advocates have pushed for the justice system to reckon with its own history and past and violence towards people of color. I think health too needs to reckon with its sordid past and acts of violence in the way that they see people of color, our experience of pain, our experience as lab rats. There's just a whole history that provides, I think, some context as we kind of look at the role of public health in addressing this issue, and many other issues related to communities of color. So I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's important to ask similar questions about how we compel this field industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry to be accountable to some of the questions and things that we're wrestling with here. So how do we do that? What does that take? Because right now, where are we compelling systems to actually partner or pay attention to communities? There are some cracks, and I think, I run a national organization that focuses on hospital-based and hospital-linked violence intervention work that is it's been testing this out in 50 cities across the country, which is a partnership with hospitals who, because the healthcare system touches those victims of violence all the time, the shooters, everybody, it touches all the forms of violence that we're talking about here, but if we're gonna focus on gun violence, here's a place. And the model, it requires a relationship, with the community, with folks who have lived experience, are credible, who are connected, have access to the hospital, to the bedside of those who are experiencing violence. And Ray's explained this, I don't want to go into the details, but I want to talk broadly about the incredible ownership and experimentation at this intersection allows for new discussions, and I want to talk about what those new discussions are. There are, because of this work, you know, we have places like in Boston where hospitals are beginning to consider their procurement policies and make it, you know, their employment, actually doing housing projects. Seeing the hospital as investors in communities as a violence reduction strategy. So now we're talking about mobilizing resources driven by community to actually address this issue. That puts them on the hook, right? They do assessment for community benefit, they're required to. Are they paying attention? Are they asking questions about the things we're talking about here? We've done a survey and the answer is not really, and they could be. Thinking about the payers in the healthcare system. So elevating this work of, you know, the violence prevention professional, they have a million names interrupted, but they are folks who have the experience in communities. You know, we were instrumental in getting that designation, right, the race of the world, classified within the National Uniform Claims Code. That code, that taxonomy, again, it's an infrastructure question. So nurses are designated there, right? Physicians. Now we have the race of the world in the code, and then we can put payers on the hook for paying for this work. So, you know, so we've introduced legislation that that's actually, you know, we have in California, it sits on the governor's desk. You know, I was coming in here still talking to the governor's office and probably going to die, but I think I'm going to get to that in a second, but there is an opportunity to resource this work through other means, and I think opens up questions about how we can envision health and thriving as a framework, and liberation as a framework that mobilizes.
I just want to interrupt.
Sure.
I remember when I first heard you reveal this at the John Jay conference, I fell off my chair. So can you just say, we talk about resources, we talk about a point of advocacy, and to find funding sources, you said for the race of the world, that's a good way of describing it, people who can do this work. And where's the money? There's a lot of money in healthcare. Just say it again.
Yes.
And I'm going to, on your behalf, invite you to be in touch with you to figure out how to make this something that
Yes.
the state can do.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we introduced legislation in California and in New Jersey that would compel Medicaid to pay for violence prevention services. And you know, our strategy at this point was to kind of test. You know, we were just learning, right? We were shocked that it went through the system in California, and I think it's because people hadn't thought about it. They just had no idea. But you know, our goal was, and there's been an 80-page analysis of its impact on the health. You know, what's the impact of violence on the healthcare system, and how the cost savings, right? And it obviously will save money, but I think it's again, these are deeper questions about who's on the hook for some piece of this, where the accountability is about, are you caring for communities of color? You're accountable to caring. What does that care look like, and is it actually responsive to the needs? So there's a remarkable, again, accounting for the violence of ignoring the needs, ignoring the pain, ignoring the trauma structurally of communities of color. Like, that has not happened. But I think this gives us an opportunity to have those discussions.
So having just encouraged you to spend more time talking about that, I'm going to ask you to hold your other comments just in the interest of the queue, because your colleagues are eager to this very rich mix that we're building here. And the next one up is Beth. During the break, if you want to find Fatima, she'll have a table somewhere, or just this is really, really important work, and it's Beth, and then Ron, then Candace, then Eric, and then
Okay, a long list after me, so I'll make two very brief
Thank
points.
you.
Although I wanted you to go on and on. Thank you for your paper. I appreciate the public health approach. Guess what I'm going to bring up? Come on. So I want to raise 2 points that I won't elaborate on, but just for a point of thinking about for the future. One is I'm interested in thinking about what it would mean, like, what it means to do better policing or to have more murders solved, 2 points that I think you brought up that are important. And in the murders solved, it makes me think about what it means in cities like Detroit that we have called for example, this is one example, testing rape kits to get rid of the backlog of all of the people who have been sexually assaulted and there's and I wonder, stepping out there, I think that's critically important, but that doesn't prevent sexual assault to test a kit. What it does is maybe solve a crime, and when we solve a crime, we sometimes call then for more incarceration of people. It doesn't prevent crime. And so solving murders is critically important in some ways for a sense of healing. And I don't minimize that at all. I don't want to say this quickly. I don't minimize that, but it doesn't prevent crime. It doesn't bring justice, capital J. It brings maybe a sense of something internal to people's hearts and to family members and community members. So I want to just make that problematic. And it leads me to a question about what it would mean to disarm the police. And I don't think we've talked about that very much. In a sense of demasculine, how do we say that? Making less masculine the interaction between law enforcement officers and community members. Again, I don't want to take a lot of time to talk about it, but I think part of the question about what better policing would look like would mean that we would do a different kind of policing that wouldn't so much rely on brute force as a way to resolve conflict or certainly to create peace. The second point I want to raise without elaborating on is I think part of what we need to look at when we evaluate programs like Cure Violence is violence that happens within the context of activist groups that lead people to not be able to be involved with them. And I know there's been a lot of critique of Cure Violence. I'm only using Cure Violence as one example because that's the one that's on the table. But I think we need to look at the internal dynamics of what happens in activist orientations that articulate a very clear analysis of racial justice and community accountability and other things that we want to co-sign when sometimes in those same political formulations, women are excluded at best or harmed more directly.
Rob.
So, Professor, Dr. I'm going to push back. I used Oakland as an example, but I'm going to tie in that Oakland has something in common with Detroit and with New York. And that is, you said community-led, but I think not so much community-led in the sense of do this program. It started in 2 phases, community-led. First community-led was stop doing what you're doing, and that required federal intervention. So you had federal intervention in New York that said stop this was unconstitutional, told the police stop doing what you're doing, find another way. You had federal intervention in Oakland where through a plaintiff's lawsuit, private plaintiffs stopped doing what you're doing through a consent decree. But at the same time, when the community was strong, they demanded those accountability on the front end. And then still said, but we're still holding you accountable to be effective in fighting crime, which now meant has the community coming and saying, here's the way to do it. So what I guess I'm offering is this the part we talk about, that interplay where the state and community can come together. You got to get the state to first stop doing what it's doing in order for it to be open to do something new. And in some cases, it's the kind of federal intervention that Paul talked about yesterday, whether they're consent decrees or others that says, stop, through the courts. Now that you've stopped this, you have to find the right way, and I'm open to evidence-based practices and science and things of that nature. So people say community-led. It's not like the community. Some communities are very sophisticated, and not every community has a reg that will understand some of the crime fighting, but all of them will know that this stop and frisk or this brutality, these things are just not appropriate, and that's why you can't solve crime. That's why people are going to talk to you. So stop, change, and then work together.
I am convinced that Ron is my Scottie Pippen. So I'm gonna mic you and dunk this one, but I appreciate your setup. I will agree and not overstate. I do think, because I hate to feel like a conversation is Groundhog Day and we're not pulling the other conversations into it. Paul, you laid out in your paper 3 examples of cities that you thought were doing good things: Oakland, New York, LA. The interesting thing about those is that they are.
Okay.
Dan, you called him Paul. Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. No, I'm talking about Paul. I'll get there. Okay, I'll stay with you. Paul also talked about his consent decree examples, which were, both consent decrees, Oakland and LA. I distinguish the issue with stop and frisk because while stop and frisk came much later, I think what happened is that even before most police departments, there was a point in history where New York professionalized, is what I'll call it. And I'm not advocating for police because I think that can get dicey, but I do think what it is an example of across those jurisdictions of public infrastructure that is deemed somehow by force or whatever from outside legitimate. And the reason I think that's so important is because for me, in a global conversation about what's happened the other 3 days, I think it underscores the need for not or, but and across all these things that we're asking for. In both of those jurisdictions, you have what you illustrate as really important going on. You had what Paul was talking about around consent decrees. You also in these places had public investment, right? In Oakland, you had Measure Z and Y, which was the tax base that paid for the programs so that you didn't just have stick, you actually had carry. In New York, y'all just raining money from that. So I don't know where it's coming from, but you had the ARA money, you had Bloomberg's Black Men and Boys money, you had investment in these so you could really scale community investment. In Los Angeles, you had LA Grid, they pulled this money, all of their aldermen poured money. Like, I wanna be really intentional, because the one thing that I am still hungry for in this discussion is some concrete. Like, I walked in saying, I wanna learn how to change. I don't wanna just state problems. You know what I mean? It's like it doesn't get you anywhere, but I think it's really intentional that in these 3 jurisdictions, there were lots of things going on all at once and they fed each other. None of them actually perfect on their own. By contrast, which I also think is important for this discussion, is you had Baltimore, which you use as a piss poor example. But I'm gonna throw Chicago in there as well, because they're both examples of cities where by contrast, you had sort of a Barney Fife, I'm gonna look at y'all too, style policing still going on, right? A fundamental lack of trust in a mass public infrastructure. You had no scale funding in either jurisdiction in communities, in violence intervention. So even though you had some things, you had stick, no carrot, which doesn't build trust and legitimacy in these kinds of interventions. And you, I forgot my third damn point, but I think y'all get it, right? And so I just think it's really important because I think across these conversations, like there's so many, taking things by force, acting for it, but this is about and. Like, I do think it's really, I can't say enough that I think fighting for structural investment, that's what makes these things illustrative of things we like. There was structural investment across a lot of different things, accountability, and I think in a lot of ways it was forceful.
David Kennedy just exercised his immediate intervention, right? Was that what that was? No? Okay.
When you get to.
Okay, when I get to it, great. So we have a pretty long queue. I promised people that we'll be taking a break at 12, so appreciate brevity. We'll see how we do. Erica's next. People are real jealous of New York. I don't know. Go ahead. And Danielle, and then Ray, and then David. We're gonna cut it there. Sorry for everyone else. Cut it there after David Kennedy. It's really weird because he's live streaming right next to me. What did we just do?
15 seconds.
Eric, good. So I just want to put a disclaimer out that New York is not perfect, and all of the great solutions, ideas, and things that New York is doing was not created or invented by me. That we have great advocates and activists on the ground that were doing this before there was funding. And now that there is funding to support it, it's been brought to a different capacity, but we're still not even meeting the needs that we have in New York. So in order for me to get home and be safe at home, I just have to I have 3 responses and 1 question. So Bruce, you asked to Paul about successful programs and what that looks like in the cure violence space. So I could share for us what we've seen is 1, longevity of program implementation, the relationship of the executive director or others that are influential in the organization with the community that they're serving, turnover in staff, continuous and ongoing training, professional development and personal development, investments for the workforce, and then integrating that workforce into government so that they actually see themselves as an extension of what our office is doing. Beth, I agree with you 100% on the gender inclusion piece. We are doing a lot of men. It's a mandatory training for our entire workforce to attend call to men training on an annual basis. So we are picking that piece up. And then for the room, I just want everyone to be aware that there are CIPRA funding opportunities that all municipalities should be seeking. Basically partnership pay. So as you're producing results and you have evidence from the college that you can show that you have these cost savings, you should be approaching the Fed and others in support of paying for what these operations look like and how it can be brought to scale and how you can reinvest back into community. My question is around illegal gun possession, which is treated as a felony crime in New York. And I wanted to get Daniel's take on just his thoughts on, is illegal gun possession, in your view, a felony crime? And if not, what are appropriate ways that it could be dealt with?
Okay. Danielle, appreciate your precise observations and questions, Danielle. And I've got Keith, and then Ray, and then David.
So I just want to make sure we're always exercising real care, because I agree very much that if you ask people in communities with high levels of violence where the focus of policing should be, people will say on serious violence, right? Like that's, nobody's like weed, right? That's not ever the answer. And so, and at the same time, I think very often we take that information to be somehow equivalent to a call for enforcement and punishment, and it's not. And so everybody who knows me knows that people in common justice only get in with the consent of the victims of their crime. Half of victims don't call the police in the first place, another half don't make it past grand jury. That subset who we call, who are on the jail train, 90% choose common justice when given the option. And they don't do that because New Yorkers are not only rich but merciful. They do it because survivors are pragmatic, and we want things that will keep us safe and will keep others from enduring what we endured. That's it. That's what we want at the end of the day. Even if in our hearts we also want to like wring out the necks of the people who hurt us. At the end of the day, given a choice, we'll choose the things that give safety. And the thing I worry about with calls for targeted enforcement on the people most likely to shoot and in some cases be shot, which is a criminalization of victimization. The thing I worry about that is that we presume that the result of that enforcement should be incarceration, which we know is productive of violence. Like we know that violence on the individual level is made by shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and an inability to meet one's economic needs. And that prison is made of shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and an inability to meet one's economic needs. And so I think the kind of rigor we apply in all of the conversation up to the point of identifying where we should focus our attention very often falls away when we behave as though the focus on that attention is still fundamentally, for lack of options or anything else, means putting people in cages. And I think we have to be disciplined about extending that rigor all the way through to what the consequence will be. And who will or won't benefit from that consequence.
Thanks, Danielle. Also, thanks for precise and powerful mention. Keith's next, and then Ray, and then David.
Thanks. A
I'm not always sure this moves the conversation forward. I got triggered a little bit by something earlier that Daniel started talking about, so the increased presence of guns in public spaces. And it's something that kind of relates to something brought up before about like how the public police throughout private police. But it feels like a return to private policing. More and more people are having guns in public spaces, and to me, maybe it's because of where I'm from Indiana, grew up in Indiana, and whenever I see guns in public spaces, it's telling me, it makes me feel less safe. It makes me feel like I'm likely to be victimized, and makes me think about carrying a gun. But the crazy thing is, I get the same feeling when I see the American flag.
Say that. Yeah.
The more proudly displayed I see it, the more fear I have. Today, not just growing up, today. Yeah. I just want to put that out.
Right. Before you start, we're going to dispense with Bruce's summary here and ask you to, whatever you would say here, wrap it up to the end of the day. And Daniel will give you a minute or two, anything you want to highlight that can continue during the break. Yeah, right.
So real quick, and this is in response to Ms. Beth, being able to put it in two different lenses, public health and public safety. Whereas on the public safety side is how do we solve murders? On the public health lens is how do we prevent murders? And so the challenge in this is to us as an entirety, how do we start to measure retaliation prevention on the lives that were saved, right? I can say as a fact that in the last 90 days, we know that the neighborhood folk have prevented, just say all the shooters, they're not active, right? They don't know how to kill. They know how to hit the target. We've prevented at least 15 shootings, right? But how is that measured, right? And then we go back to the question of how do we reimagine law enforcement or what does better policing look like, right? And so when you look at law enforcement training is peer-to-peer, if you will, right? So how do we incorporate neighborhood folk into that where you still normalize and humanize folk in the neighborhood and in the community, and that then allows for a law enforcement officer to say, or maybe even stop and think, before I chase somebody to their death, this is a kid that I may have been forced to mentor, right? That's on probation or parole, or I deem him to be at risk or a driving force to the violence, right? But really putting in neighborhood folk, right? When we talk about community, we have different facets of community, but really intentional about neighborhood folk being part of that reimagining what policing community looks like.
David?
So in the call for in the meantime,
Aaliyah said, I measure what I do by fewer dead people and fewer people locked up. And
more freedom.
More freedom, right? Me too, right? And that is the goal of a growing body of applied work. One thing we're seeing there is that it is almost impossible to make this kind of thing work over time. And study after study after study, example on the ground after example on the ground of effective impact, which is only sustained and built upon, it turns out, if it is rooted in relationship with effective local governance. You cannot do it against the tide of dysfunctional local government. You can keep it going for a little while, you can light the candle, it will burn bright, and the weight of that local dysfunction will kill it every single time. Where there is effective local governance and effective relationship with local governance, those turn out to be the conditions in which community knowledge, community insight, the adoption, the overtaking of criminal justice function by community action can take root, flourish, and develop. So in all of these places, there is less and less policing, there is more and more community action. What used to be done by criminal justice is being done by other means. It's funded, it's embedded, it's honored. That appears to be absolutely, completely impossible without an effective relationship with effective local government, which is often produced by activism, right? This is not either voluntary or just the federal hammer. It is the product of people making sure that it happens and making sure that this work is honored. And sort of to link this back to our conversation from yesterday, so far as an empirical matter, we need the state to make this work. We don't necessarily need the same state we've got now, but we need the state to make this work. And what we also know abstractly and what is increasingly concrete is that when local government and the agents of the state are seen as illegitimate, that has an independent, violent, productive effect. And increases in legitimacy, which can be produced through this process, through responsiveness, through changes in behavior, independently create increases in public safety, less police and prosecution, more freedom, less people in jail. And I'm going to invite Eric Jones to return to this at a moment of his choosing, but the trust building work that Eric did with others in Stockton over the course of about 2 years of real activism produced big decreases in homicide, large increases in case clearance, which is effectively a marker of community trust, and substantial reductions in police use of force. Right? And the addition to the Stockton mix was largely trust building. So I've come to believe that the answer, the fundamental near-term, right now answer to do we need the state is yes, we absolutely need the state, because it's only in conditions of effective local governance that this other work can actually be done.
I'm going to turn to Daniel for a couple observations and responses to this discussion. And then we'll take a 15-minute break and come back. And I just, we're kind of just short a little bit. I just encourage people to find each other during the break and continue to raise questions.
Thank you, Jeremy. So, part of my response to the great input here is mostly head nods for me, truly, and I will be incorporating some changes in the paper. Candace, really hit the nail on the head about the importance of resources here. That was actually in an earlier draft that I don't know what happened to, but I actually totally recognize that. And it's somewhat relevant, I think, to the question Bruce raised, which is basically, why do you see impact sometimes some places and not others? And I'm going to tell you that I believe Baltimore tried to do this on the cheap, and they tried to do group violence intervention on the cheap. This requires resources, total commitment, and if you don't do that, you're not going to get the impact. I do think that there are other constraints also, because that do connect to that other aspect of there being some reasonable, credible deterrence from violence that comes not only from community, but also from law enforcement. Beth, another head nod to what you were prompting, what is missing, and I have stuff I can definitely connect to that, so thank you very much. I'll try to end just, I feel like Eric raised a question, which is, should gun possession, illegal gun possession be a felony? My opinion, generally no. Maybe some exceptions, you know, the data are really, really clear. If you have a history of violence and a number of illegal gun possession charges, that's a really strong predictor of something's really bad if you keep doing that, right? And I'd love to all the restorative stuff and prevention, we need that, but it may be that, you know, certain times, yes, there has to be a consequence. And just to end it maybe with the most challenging question I think raised by Danielle really is, you know, if the product of focus enforcement, whatever you want to call it, is incarceration, that therefore must be bad. I guess my feeling is that the end result of focus enforcement doesn't have to be incarceration, and it doesn't have to be the worst forms of incarceration. So what I think we're lacking and what we need more models for responses to what I think is an important legal issue, which is a lot of people carrying guns around. I think a lot more people die, and we don't want that. So we need more innovative justice responses and community responses to this that will be more healing and effective. I was in right there.
So you may have noticed some action to my right here. So you said 10 seconds, so you got your 10 seconds, go.
10 seconds. I'll be remiss if I don't say this. I do believe we're in the catch-22 because I know that most neighborhoods and most inhabitants of neighborhoods, they want safety. They want safety. You gotta, oftentimes the voices of people who are not perpetrators of violence never get told. But they want safety, but they don't want it at the expense of, as someone said earlier, state-sponsored murder, where police are stopping people and don't have no way of differentiating between a thug versus a kid that's just in the culture. And so that's where we're in this catch-22 at. And I also want to say that, you know, most people in the neighborhoods, they're afraid of the killers too. They're afraid too, why they can't have guns. And then lastly, I will say this is that when we looking at this, we gotta remember this. We gotta remember this. That everybody wanna go home at the end of the day. Everybody wanna go home.
Efficient use of 10 seconds. We're gonna take a 15-minute break. We'll be back at 12:20. That's for a 2-minute break. And we'll start off with our town. Bring it home. Thanks for a very productive first half of our day. Thanks.
And I love sitting next to you.
I have a feeling.
They should shift you before this.
I have a feeling wherever you sat, my attention. Just right next to me. So
Right.
just happy to come in.
Oh, you should have done this last effort. It was hilarious. You should have seen this last effort. It was hilarious.
Likewise. Anybody know how to do that loud whistle like this? Can you do this? Okay. So we're in the home stretch, and let me just express appreciation for the discussion we had this morning, and appreciation to Daniel for allowing us, and now Barb Jones allowing us to take a bit of their time for some network and movement building activity that happened. A number of you have said you'd like to stay in touch, and I think that's on us. It's Square One project to figure out how to facilitate that sort of connectivity over time. I don't like to compare my roundtables, but that's the strongest. It never had quite as strong a demand, and hope from other roundtables we have from this one for that continuing connectivity. Before we get started, I don't think she's here, but I want to thank Ariel Goodwin, who's this kind of a community engagement and event coordinator at the Keith Center. She's in and out now. Peter, if you would express our thanks to her and to the others at your center for being our host today. There's a lot that goes into these projects. I also want to, sorry, I've misplaced. I like to do this. The name of our caterers, the people who fed us, and on behalf of all of us, if we could express our thanks to them as well. These projects, anyone who's put them on, know they take a lot of work, and to support us are very much a part of our success. I want to just make sure that we thank them and the entire university and the city of Detroit. So a big thank you to our hosts here, to Amanda, and by extension, others, to Ray, and by extension, others, to the Justice in Detroit folks who were here at the table yesterday. We've learned from you, we are inspired by you, and you've really fed our imagination as well as our understanding. So thanks to all of you. And at the very end, I'll do a shameless thanks to the Square One team. But you're just a little build up here, right? Because they're really great. Okay, so we are now in our final segment, and Beverly is going to get us started. I'm sorry. Unless you want to help out. Sorry. Barbara will get us started, or Barb, she has to be called. And it will take 10 minutes. You want to give it to Beverly?
No.
I saw that.
Conversation about the Beverly thing. That's what we're laughing. We'll clue you in later.
Okay, there's something going on. Standard setup, we'll give Barb 10 minutes, ask her any clarifying questions, and then open it up for discussion. The topic is healing from violence, and I know given her work and her experiences she shared with us yesterday, this is both personal and professional, experiential and academic for her. So we're really fortunate to have you at the table, Barb, and hope you know how much we appreciate your discussion yesterday of a painful journey that you've been on, and our side by side last night talking about your daughter and how she's been part of our live stream discussion, and hope this is meaningful for her as well. But you bring something very distinctive and powerful to the discussion. So when we thought about how we wanted to close, and we were introduced to you, and you were brought to our discussion, everybody said yes. So we're delighted that you're here. So take it away.
Thank you, everyone. I do have a disclaimer. I know this, should not be called out, but I'm going to call it out anyway. I have abundantly and exceedingly not met your expectations for having a paper today. A paper is forthcoming, and the name of the paper, the title of the paper is The Faces of Aftermath of Visible and Invisible Loss. Radical resiliency toward justice and healing. So I will, it's still a work in progress, but I do make this promise that you will get the paper. So I want everybody to write these words somewhere, whether in the journal or paper. Everybody hurts. And everybody's gonna take, will be participants in this, what I call a grounding moment with all of us together. So I want to start with Jeremy, and I want everyone to go around the table, then next Bev, and then we'll go this way and end it with you, Dan. Or someone, okay. We're gonna start with you, Jeremy, and I want you to say the 2 words, everyone to say the 2 words, everybody hurts, in their strongest voice in this moment.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts. Everybody hurts.
Everybody.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts. Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts. Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts. Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Everybody hurts.
Thank you. I don't want to reintroduce myself for the 10th time again. You all know who I am. For those that are, tuning in live stream, they also know this too. I made a disclaimer, some promises to some people, my support system, that I'm going to accomplish some things today during this session that I haven't been able to do. So I need your attentiveness in this, and I do want you to listen to me, and I want you to listen to me carefully. I want you to close your eyes and listen. I'm the mother of 2 children, Charmaine L. Jones and Conte Emmanuel Smithell. I've been a mother since I was 16 years old. Collectively, I've been a mother longer than I've been an actual human being. I don't know any other life except for being a loving, responsible, nurturing provider and protector. My life has not been my own. I raised my children to respect themselves, to respect me, to respect humanity. I'm 55 years old. I'm the mother of a murdered son. For the past 23 months, I've lived a life of physical, emotional, psychological turmoil, trauma, and unspeakable, complex, and complicated. Please close your eyes. I am not the only one who walks this journey. And I need for you to hold space for each and every mother that has lost a child. The planned demise and murder of my only son, Conte, has caused a reordering of my life in such a way that no one will be able to understand except for the mothers who has lost their children due to homicide, gun violence, lethal violence, and murder. have destroyed my family. Let me tell you a little bit about my son, Conte. Conte was a kind, respectable, loving, and affectionate young man with a unique, very unique abilities. My son always spoke to everyone and greeted you with a smile that made you feel special, valued, and important. Conte did that without fail because he did not want others to feel the pain of never, ever being loved, valued, and respected only because he wasn't treated kindly by others, and he didn't want anybody else to experience that. My son's unique ability to value everyone and everything was exhibited by his his persona. Once, driving down one of the streets in Detroit, my son's unique ability to value everything was in a conversation when he shouted out, "Mama, watch out for that squirrel." I put on the brakes to avoid hitting that squirrel. That happened often because every time we were in the car together, whether it was in Detroit or Colorado, we're always in a hurry to get somewhere. "Mama, don't hit that squirrel. Mama, don't hit that squirrel." I would pause my brake, we both looked back, and the squirrel made it across that street in whatever direction that squirrel was going into. He turned to me and he smiled, I smiled back, because I was just proud that I didn't hit that squirrel. He said, "Phew, okay, Mama, you didn't hit the squirrel," and then he would continuously smile. That smile, that smile, that smile, that smile. Conte valued life, even squirrel's life. I had just seen my son 26 days before his tragic death on an unexpected trip that my daughter facilitated. Some in this room have said that the work that they do is their ministry. I say the same thing, that this is my ministry. My last visit with my son, 26 days. Was full of love, laughter, and immediate plans for me to finally leave Detroit and relocate to be with my children. I was going to continue my work in Colorado Springs in advocacy for young people in anti-youth violence and restorative justice. In fact, I had just had a job interview the same day before my last visit with my son. We held hands, we talked about me moving here. He was so happy. We had a great conversation on how he was doing. Even the morning of the same day of the last time I saw my son, I got angry at my son because we were supposed to go to a very important appointment that we missed because there was no one to relieve him from his job so we can go to the appointment together. Yeah, I still have my mothering attitude. I have my mother and attitude for sons and daughters who are not even my own kids, because I'm committed to helping and guiding young people. Conte told me he was in a good space and that he was a little bit more comfortable being here in Colorado Springs after almost 6 years. His words brought me such immense joy. I got that phone call, that dreaded, unexpected phone call from my daughter on the morning of October 31st, 2017. 3:35 a.m. her time, about 5:35 a.m. my time, Detroit time. The ringing of my phone at that time wasn't anything startling to me because my daughter's a night owl. I really thought it was her, my granddaughter, calling me because my granddaughter got a hold of my daughter's phone often and knew how to dial her Grammy. I heard many voices when I picked up and answered the phone. And the many voices on the other end weren't talking directly to me, but I heard all of these voices. And I heard my daughter wailing in the background, a wail that I had never heard before, not even when she was born. My daughter was not able to formulate the words to me to let me know that my son, her only brother, who she's been a mother to because she's 11 and a half years older than him, my two only children, my only son and my only daughter. It was one of the detectives from the Colorado Springs Police Department who had to tell me that my son was dead. What constitutes the horrific loss for me, my daughter, and my entire family is that we have to wrestle with the facts that were caught and witnessed and viewed on multiple surveillance cameras, plus 2 Ring cameras inside the business that my son was employed. 12 and a half minutes. I watched my son give service with a smile. 12 and a half minutes. I watched my son cover his mouth in a horror shock that one of his peers, whom he did not know, 23 years old, marched in, bolted in with the AR-15 semi-automatic rifle that shot my son 7 times. I watched my son tied up. I watched my son brutalized. I heard my son scream for help. I watched my son attempting to fight and flee, something that I never taught him. I taught him either you fight or you run. My son did both at the same time. I watched my son endure 12 and a half minutes of torture, exploitation, bullying, and execution. I watched and heard my son scream out in pain. I watched my son and heard my son crawl on the floor to an exit. I watched my son take his last breaths before he gurgled and he died. What constitutes my loss constitutes my daughter's loss, my family's loss, my supportive circle, but the community. My personal and professional role of advocating for young men and women, just like you, Joshua Daugherty, and motivating them and inspiring them to live a respectable life in spite of any and all circumstances, to respect themselves, respect their parents, family, and their community. I teach peace. I champion young people. I'm with the underdog because my son was the underdog, the most vulnerable, but the most valued members of our community and future. Peace building, peacemaking, peacekeeping. You stole my son's dignity. You stole my son's trust. You laid along next to my son, pretending to be a victim, and then ultimately helping tie my son up, advancing his own demise without shame. What you did to my son. When he witnessed your contribution to this horrific act, I could not think of what was going on through my son's mind, but I watched it. Don't think for a minute that I haven't thought about you, your family, and if the tables were turned and different. And if I was in that same exact position as you and your mother and your entire family, if my son had did this to you, I've thought about you, I think about you, and I will never forget you for the rest of my life. The impact of your actions will forever be intertwined on my life and the community of Colorado Springs and Colorado. My son's life will never be restored. I must honor my son's legacy, although my life and my daughter's life and my entire family's life is destroyed. See, I created Conte's annual memorial scholarship for young men like you. My son has a face, he has a name. Although I don't agree with the slap on the wrist sentencing that you received for the murder of my son as a restorative justice practitioner and the mother of a murdered son, I'm asking Judge David Miller, the DA's office, the entire judicial system, the Youth Offender Services Program in Colorado Springs, Colorado Springs law enforcement, in my overt request to set up and implement and execute a formal and comprehensive victim-offender dialogue session with you right here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, involving me, you, your mother, and your entire family. I want my family to be there as well. This is my request. I pray that this will be honored by the above-mentioned parties from me. This is my victim's impact statement that was read on June 28th, 2019 to the Honorable Judge David Miller, officers of the court, Colorado Springs Police Department, Mr. Kelson Castaigne, Mrs. Jennifer Darby, and the entire District Attorney's Office of El Paso County. To the team, the entire team, and more importantly, to the entire community of Colorado Springs, the entire community of Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Detroit, Michigan. Keep your eyes closed. My son has been the subject of the media, at least 24 stories. My journey is not over yet. The sentencing of the now 25-year-old resulted in two life sentences plus 22 years. Life with no parole for the 25-year-old. Joshua Doherty received a 7-year sentence, and that was in exchange for him testifying against Hill. And I'm going to quote from one of the media stories that although Doherty helped tie up the victim, he did not take part in the violence because he wasn't the active shooter. The judge said that he considered rejecting the plea deal, but ultimately accepted it because Doherty's distortions on the stand didn't derail the case against Hill. 25 was convicted at the last retrial and sentenced to life in prison. The first trial in April ended with a deadlocked jury, so I've gone through this twice. Relatives of Conte Smith-Hill rallied against Daugherty's lack of accountability, saying that it bars any hope of restoration. The dead man's mother, Barbara Jones, a Detroit-based anti-violence advocate, said in court that she would like to meet with Daugherty in prison for the dialogue. The judge encouraged Daugherty to accept my offer, saying that he must confront his role in the death of Conte Smith-Hill before he can be fully rehabilitated. I just wanted to read that excerpt from one of the media reports. I have interfaced with every aspect of the criminal justice system to this date, and I'm still not done. We cannot heal what we are not willing to confront. So if your expectation of me today was to offer you any type of strategic models of healing, the first model that I'm going to offer you all today is that we must be willing to confront the truth before we can even think about healing. I was the first witness in 2 trials. To provide proof of life for a kid that I carried under my heart. My story of the complicated and complex aspects of grief, mourning, honoring the legacy of my dead son, pretty much frames what my paper is about: the aftermath of the faces of invisible and visible violence that will move us to radical resiliency towards justice and healing. But we cannot get there until we deal with this pain. And when you all don't listen to me, you don't want to hear the pain. You want me to tuck my pain, but you want me to stay in this fight. I offer you, we cannot confront the pain if you refuse to listen. That's just my story. It's a couple of people in this room that are dealing with the same thing that I even have a guilt about, because we've asked this question so many times: who's accountable? What does justice look like for you? What does justice look like for you, Barb? I've gotten the platitudes. I cannot imagine what you're going through. And I know that is not an empty platitude. I receive that the best way that I can. But where I am today, that moves me toward radical resiliency as it relates to justice and healing, is that all of you have imagined, even when you tell me I haven't imagined what you're going through, Barb. People even ask me, why did you watch that video? And not only did I watch it once, I watched it twice, because I couldn't believe the capacity that we have with each other that is so institutionalized and so systemic that we jump over, that we don't talk about. No one wants to hear my story or pain because it makes others feel uncomfortable. This is dangerous work for me. It's dangerous work for you. And when Ray Wyman said earlier on how we're going to do this reconciliation justice, because my son's life cannot be restored. When I offered my victim impact statement, when I turned around to walk away, not only did I have to give one impact statement, I had to give two. My daughter had to give two. My ex-husband, who is a product, an example of the criminal justice system. My ex-husband, my children's father, is a product of this marginalized and institutionalized system who's dependent upon the police to help solve our son's crime. The level of justice that I received ain't no winners here. I still have to confront that family who did this to my son. After I read my victim impact statement, and I haven't shared this with too many people, and I'm putting myself out here. In a way that I'm trying to make this rational and so logical because of how I came into this academic space at the age of 48. To get educated, get a piece of paper that I already know because I'm a mother. When I walked away from giving my impact statement, and my daughter walked up, when I turned around and faced that family, they laughed at me. They laughed at me. I couldn't even sit down and listen to my own daughter give her victim impact statement because I was so overwhelmed with the ridicule that I received from another family. To where when I sat down, I had to excuse myself because something was about to erupt in that courtroom that would have said, not the Barbara Jones that I know. I have interacted with law enforcement in a way that I'm going to challenge everyone in this room. Because of where we're from, I was already stereotyped when I had to talk to the first officer on a call. Because I'm from Detroit, I'm a single Black mother. Nobody sees me as an academic. They don't respect me as an academic. I'm a Black mother who suffered from visible and invisible violence. And we Black mothers and we parents get the blame all the time. I know some amazing parents that is dealing with the same issue that I'm dealing with. That's not in this room, that need to be in this room. But we don't want to talk about them. You all don't even want to acknowledge me, and you see me every single day. We can't heal. I can't heal. You can't heal. Everybody hurts. We can't heal what we cannot confront. And in closing, I've touched 14, probably more than 14, 15 in a mistrial, and in a retrial. We're not even talking about the loss that I have suffered. And for me to sit there in the work that we do together, and I gotta sit there and be on the other side of this. I quit my job every single day. When I got that call and when my director came over to see me in Detroit, I can't even focus because I told my director that I didn't need this purpose. I didn't need this event to define the purpose of what I was doing in my life. I was already operating in my purpose, and it still happens to me. And every other mother that is operating in their purpose that haven't even received the level of justice that I have. I got mothers that haven't even gone through the court system. I got mothers that want justice. What does justice mean to you? What does justice mean to me? It's an injustice. When I walk around this university, I walk around and I see people who can't even look me in the face. But I'm expected to continue to help somebody else's child and minimize their own grief and pain and trauma that I'm trying to figure out what I need because I have gone through this and I'm still going through this. What about the mother who hasn't even received the level of justice? And I'm suffering guilt from that because I carry them with me. But one thing that I'm going to say is that I had a very interesting conversation with the lead detective of my son's case, who didn't know anything about me except for my son was dead. They had to notify my daughter. They had to do all this notification. Didn't even know anything about me nor my son. But he judged me, prejudged me, because I'm from Detroit with 267 homicides that I purposely got my son out of this environment and got my son to Colorado Springs so he wouldn't continue to experience violence and the forms of violence that he experienced before he met his demise. I purposely did that. And it still happened in Colorado Springs. My son was the 26th homicide. I said that yesterday in Colorado Springs. One of the things a police officer said to me after our exchange, heated exchange, because I was stereotyped in a way to where I couldn't focus on the loss of my son. I gotta focus on what this officer said to me that offended me. To the point where I had to say, you don't know who you're talking to. You got the right Black mother here. And from that exchange, to this day and ongoing, because I'm still dealing with the aftermath of the invisible loss, dealing with the criminal justice system, that police officer told me after we had the interesting conversation, he said, Ms. Jones, I don't mean to offend you. I am going to treat your son as if this was my son, because he didn't deserve this. What law enforcement officer tells a Black mother from Detroit that? Colorado Springs police did. I operated in a community where we have advocates for mothers that deal with homicide. Front lines, we are in a dangerous position. But I still have to hold space for the 2 Black mothers who are advocating and murdered in Chicago. Black mothers who were murdered in Chicago just recently for the advocacy and on the ground
trying to bring peace, justice, and healing to a community. And those 2 Black mothers were shot in Chicago. I got to hold space for them. There is a visible and invisible loss that you all don't even have an idea of what I'm just personally dealing with, because I have the opportunity to tell my story that nobody wants to hear. I've actually been refamed and redirected from even telling my story because it's too painful for someone to hear. But I have you all coming up to me and saying, I can't imagine what you're going through. I say this and I say this again, that you all have imagined what I'm going through because you lived my words with your eyes closed, but you also held another type of space for me, for those who are parents and mothers in this room. Because for 30 seconds, at least on minimum, you put yourself in my position, but you were able to remove yourself from that pain because it did not happen to you. So you have imagined. There's much, much more to what I can talk about as it relates to radical resiliency and justice and healing in a space outside of 10 minutes that results in a paper that my son is the data. Your son is the data. Everybody's sons and daughter is the data. But no one will look at me. No one will look at this walking, breathing data. My grief, your grief, is an act of love. And the only thing that I had envisioned is that we got these young people, we got these artists talking about love. We want the art to come into the spaces, but none of us at this round table, whether we've had a conversation or not, but based off of what I heard, and I've stepped out a couple of times, I've never heard anything about love being in this conversation. Because we love what we do. And on some days, we really don't like what we do. We show up every day. And I have not missed a beat because I got some people that love and support me in so many ways that I don't even know, that I can't even trust. Because this work is dangerous. We are on the front lines, and you don't know how dangerous just me being here is. That's some radical real resiliency, because I don't know what's going to happen after this. But I'm expected to heal. And there's no trauma-informed grief to help me or another mother deal with the visible and the visible loss that we're all dealing with, that we have not had this conversation about. Because yes, we talk about descendants, we talk about offenders. We ain't talking about the victims. I got another mother who says ain't no such thing as healing. I don't even believe in the power of healing. She's on the front lines every single day. We're all spiritual in this room. We may not all practice the same faith. And this has been heavy for everyone, everyone, everyone. How are you all going to walk away from this space, from this city, really from each other. If we can't talk about what we need to do to even heal, we can't heal what we're not willing to confront. There's a lot of stuff we're not confronting. Thank you. The last exercise, as a part of this, you all said it in your voice, that everybody hurts. Now I want us to collectively say, everybody hurts, hold on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Everybody hurts. Hold on. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm thinking, Barb, about where we are, where you brought us. And appreciate the hugs that are being offered. And as we end our time together, and those who understand if we forego his closing, I would just like to provide an opportunity for anybody who would like to say anything in the spirit of the love that Barbara asked us to name and acknowledge to you or to each other, and then leave the commitment to continue hard work and confrontation that is necessary for healing. So the mics and floors are open for any final words of appreciation. Yeah.
Just in the spirit
Please.
of trauma-informed
And
work.
any way you'd like to.
Barbara, thank you so much. I want to just, as you can imagine, and feel the impact in the room, we can just do a quick breathing exercise, just to kind of center us since this is the end. So I want to invite everyone to just put your feet on the ground, and you decide to keep your eyes open or closed, but we're just going to do some breathing together, some visualization. So just notice your feet on the ground. Take a deep breath in. Exhale slowly. Deep cleansing breath in. Exhale slowly. Deep breath in. Exhale slowly. Just take a moment. Thighs. Continue your awareness up through your spine. Notice your shoulders release tension now. Continue to breathe. Awareness up through your face, all the way extend beyond your crown. Remember to take care of yourself and continue to breathe.
Thank you all for the last 3 days. Thank you, Fatima, for that. And thank you, Barb, for the reminder of what's important in life. We are basically, we remind us there are others who are speaking for and are not here. That many people around the state we work with every day, we care about, and are trying to be there for them. And the appreciation that I want to express to everybody is for your generosity of spirit and for your willingness to engage in ways that are sometimes uncomfortable. And unless you want to say something before we close, I'm happy to see the mic.
I think there's sometimes an invisibility of this pain, and I think it's meaningful to mourn and to see in a compassionate space.
Other final words. I don't want to be the only voice at the end of our time together.
Thank everybody for their participation. Barb, really thank you. Being who it is that you are, right? Like, that's just who it is that you are, right? But really serves that example, right? So I just want to thank you for that. And Amanda, wouldn't expect anything less. And lastly, you as sister, it's your face. There you go. That work to do, baby. That work to do. Thank you. Thank you. Seriously, thank you.
Thank you for hosting this.
It's what I'm doing. It's a term of endearment.
Yeah. Thank you. We hope to stay in touch. We applaud the work that everybody's doing here. It's important in all the ways that we described. And thanks for being so generous and being with us the last 3 days. Thanks.